Boggy Swamp is a bad level. No, it's totally okay. But if you're not gonna design to the strengths of linearity, why even bother? It's for that reason I think this main stage falls a bit short of all the others, ignoring Precursor Basin, because the linearity does come at the cost of something, that something being exploration and open-endedness. I am at least glad that the end of Boggy Swamp perfectly loops back to the start though, so when you're finished, it's straight the hell back to Rock Village. Backtracking in a scenario you miss something along the way isn't the biggest deal either, because the stage isn't that long, and you can take the end of the stage as your starting point. Say you couldn't beat the Rats minigame before and intend to come back to it, you can get there in a totally reasonable time. You can even do the stage backwards, right as you first enter it, which puts a novel twist on things, but checkpoints sadly don't register this way, so it's not that viable of an option. Bummer. Once you've collected 45 total power cells, the boulder claw dropped on Rock Village can be lifted, and the game's second boss encounter is about to go down. This fight sees players jumping between 3 different platforms to avoid a series of boulders shot in their direction, and then grabbing Blue Eco to summon a precursor bridge. From there, the rolling boulders must be avoided to find Yellow Eco by the end, which is then used to shoot Claw right in the fucking dick. I'm not kidding, the fireballs are absolutely tracking his crotch. Like the Dark Eco plant in Forbidden Jungle, this battle consists of 3 cycles, and with each cycle, Claw shoots the boulders at you faster while the Precursor Bridge has more gaps to fall into, making it trickier to prevent contact with the rolling boulders. As you'd expect, it's not a spectacular boss, but it's a decent test of reaction time and dexterity with the controls, and unmistakably more challenging than the Dark Eco plant, partially by the fact everything is suspended above a pool of instant kill lava. One element in particular that I get a kick out of is the track that plays in the background. It's unlike most of the score, as it's one of the few pieces that isn't there to support a certain atmosphere. Instead, it's got energy and aims more to be epic with its heavy percussion and brassy instruments, which gels better with the action of a boss encounter. Following Claw's boss fight is Mountain Pass, the second linear zoomer stage in the game. This time there's no temperature meter to keep track of, but the potential of dying is higher due to the pass containing more pitfalls than Fire Canyon, and there's explosives littered all across the pass that reset you to the beginning upon a single touch. You can't take your all sweet time either, as you're racing a group of flying lurkers to the finish. Lose to them, and all the explosives are detonated at once, blowing up the whole canyon. This stage highlights the effect Blue Eco has on the zoomer pretty well. With each ball of Blue Eco you grab, your max speed increases, maxing out at 4, and you can maintain that velocity as long as you don't let go of the acceleration or crash into something. It's super satisfying to go so fast and keep it up, and I wish this mechanic was used more extensively during zoomer sections. It's a great concept that unfortunately goes a bit underutilized. Something else worth mentioning about Mountain Pass outside of the driving itself is that it contains the one and only collectible in the entire adventure for which backtracking is strictly necessary. You have to destroy an impeding rock with Yellow Eco, and the vent that supplies this Eco is activated in Snowy Mountain, an area you cannot visit until you've cleared Mountain Pass. I'm really not a fan of forced backtracking, as I've made apparent, but mercifully returning to the spot is only about a minute-long detour, and the realization to head back here after activating the Yellow Eco vent can make it worth the price of admission. The rock itself and the blocked vent don't really grab your attention as you're speeding by the first time either, so it's also a fairly well hidden power cell. You could argue the Blue Eco vent in Sentinel Beach, activated through the Precursor Temple in Forbidden Jungle, counts as forced backtracking, but that's only true if you happen to go to Sentinel Beach before Forbidden Jungle. The game's dialogue admittedly guides you to Sentinel Beach as a starting point, but this was probably used as a tool to teach players that some eco vents are opened in other stages more than anything else. Of course, in any subsequent playthrough, the player could easily go to Forbidden Jungle before Sentinel Beach as well, so I don't find that particular case, or the one in Mountain Pass for that matter, too offensive. These are still far cries from the crap you have to do in DK64 and, again, the original Crash trilogy. Anyway, the mountain pass connects to the volcanic crater, which is the third and most barren hub of them all. There's little sign of life here, with only the duo of miners to talk to, but it makes sense for such a hot place to be devoid of activity and visitors. I actually kind of enjoy that aspect of the hub. It's got such an oddly relaxing vibe to it, with the soft and mellow music, and merely the sound of minecarts operating in the background. You even get to board the minecarts to reach a few of your destinations, and though it's a slightly slow mode of transport, the rides are short enough that it's never a chore. Also, what Volcanic Crater may lack in NPCs, it makes up for with some actual story development. When you...
How about you?
No.
No way. Come on, no. No.
You go inside the Red Sage's hut and activate the teleporter gates. Hold the fucking phone. Did Samos just say fuck when he crashed out of there?
Oh, fuck. I always wonder if I'm losing body parts in those things.
Or am I just hearing things?
Oh, fuck.
Okay, sorry, got a little distracted there for a moment. When you activate that teleporter gate, Gall and his sister Maya crash the party and are finally properly established as the game's main antagonists. Gall used to be the sage of Dark Eco, but an unhealthy amount of exposure to the substance made him and Maya go mad. Now they've kidnapped the other sages and are plotting to harness all their energy to power a precursor robot that can open the silos. Massive artifacts which contain deep storages of Dark Eco. You know, the reveal of a villain was to be expected, sooner or later, as Gall and Maya are shown up to be something fishy on Misty Island in the opening cutscene with all the lurkers. But as I've said before, it's notable that the story manages to have a driving force for so long without a tangible threat to the world and its inhabitants. What's even more notable is the plot twist that one of the antagonists is the only person who is capable of returning Daxter to his previous form. This is foreshadowed as Gall and Maya leave behind particles of Dark Eco in the opening cutscene, and Samos tells Jack and Daxter the next morning that Gall is the only sage who studied Dark Eco. But regardless, it could definitely come unexpected, and by cartoony platformer standards, it's admirable to incorporate a shakeup of events like this. You've been playing through roughly 66% of this game, motivation being to restore Daxter, and suddenly the focus shifts to reaching Gall and Maya's Citadel and stopping their evil plans, leaving you wondering up to that point if Daxter is ever going to be unautsold.
Wait a minute! That was Gall? The same Gall who's supposed to change me back? Gall is the guy trying to kill us? I'm doomed.
The existence of the sequels does mitigate that last part, however, the Gall plot twist on its own is still an intriguing one, and I think it makes the story as a whole a bit more enjoyable than it would have been otherwise. I'm just saying, it's not as if Gall and Maya by themselves are strong villains. Their plans to destroy and then bend the world to their liking are stereotypical. They lack personality and bonding between each other for that matter with their generic dialogue, and they fail to come off as forces to be reckoned with. They just have no lasting impression. And that's a shame because Cortex, yeah, that motherfucker was pretty lit, especially in combination with Ooga Boogada's evil twin brother, Uka Uka. Part of the reason may be that Gall and Maya barely get any screen time in order to set up the plot twist. But then I remembered my homies like Tiny Tiger, Embryo, Pinstripe, Entropy, Dingodile, Ripperoo. All more memorable opponents by their character design and quirky traits if you ask me, and none of these are ever the main bad guys, so what went wrong here? At least the performances for Gall and Maya are up to par with the rest, which is a compliment because the voice acting on the whole is excelente. Countless games before this are filled with voice performances where it feels like the actors were pulled off the streets, poorly directed, or simply didn't fit the characters at all, often resulting in something that is considered classic and deliciously entertaining, but only because of how bad and stupid it really is. With Jack and Daxter, though, everybody sounds professional. There is not an instance I can recall where I found something to sound particularly out of place or in need of a retake. The highlight is, of course, Max Casella as Daxter. You could not have wished for a better duo, I think, as Casella understands Daxter and how the character should react to situations.
I've got a power cell that says you can do it.
Yeah, lightning moles. We can. Maybe for 2 power cells.
This is one of those cases where I think the voice actor has a large part in defining the character. Daxter without Casella simply isn't Daxter, and if you ever find Casella's delivery grating, that's most likely because the character was written and directed in that fashion. Warren Burton as Samos is a treat too, and beyond the main cast, even the one-off characters have received competent acting. I love how the voice actor for the Knight in Rock Village can transition from his brave side to his defeated side so seamlessly.
I climbed the hill to take him on, but he pounded me like one tenderizes a yak out steak.
And the hillbilly accent for the loner in Boggy Swamp gets me every time. He wouldn't be nearly as fun of a character without that performance. Kevin Conroy even makes an appearance as he played the fisherman in Forbidden Jungle. The cutscene presentation in general is really clean, with the animation probably being the aspect most worthy of praise. And there is none of that head bobbing and tilting when people are talking like in Metal Gear Solid, or some awkward motion capture going on like in Sonic Adventure 2. And while the PS2 hardware helps over the PS1 and Dreamcast hardware, a large part of what brought such fantastic results is certainly Naughty Dog's talent with animation. It's not merely the smoothness of it all either. I could not spot any reuse of loops or cycles to save on production time and budget, and every bit of animation perfectly complements a character's lines and thoughts to make them come truly alive, from small hand gestures to facial expressions. Heck, even characters that are not the main focus of the shot almost always are fully animated with their own reactions to situations. Jack is sightseeing whenever Kira isn't looking his way and acts as though he's concerned all of a sudden the moment she looks around here in Rock Village. Daxter can be seen giggling when Samos slam dunks on his head from the teleporter gate in Volcanic Crater, while Kira is more concerned and gasps. And in the scene before the final boss, Daxter waves his hand in front of his face when Samos talks near them, indicating that Samos apparently has stinky breath. This sort of attention to detail is constant, and though I still wish cutscenes could be skipped, the fact I can always be on the lookout for something I hadn't noticed about the animations before softens the blow somewhat. Combine that with the voice acting as well as the great camera work, and the bar for cinematic storytelling in video games had absolutely been raised. Snowy Mountain is the first stage connected to the volcanic crater, and some buffoons have said that the last third of the game isn't as good as the rest, that it's annoying and tedious. For that I say, bugger off, I don't know what the hell you're talking about. Snowy Mountain, I believe, is one of the best stages. For starters, it has a remarkably strong layout with fantastic flow. It's a large stage with a lot to do and see, but it's never confusing to navigate or a big time sink to get around in. When you enter the level, there are 3 pathways to take, with Path A being the one with the rolling snowballs, Path B being the shortest connection from the stage entry to the central area, and Path C being the one with the narrow walkway and the large patch of ice with a handful of precursor blockers. When you're done with Path A, you can jump off the cliff here to quickly go to the central area. Path B speaks for itself since it's literally just a connection, and Path C splits again into 2 directions, both of which ultimately lead to the same central area. Then, from this central area onwards, there are more sections to explore and take on, such as the Lurker Fortress and the cave with the yellow eco switch. These sections all sport more focused platforming and combat challenges, yet they have a loop back to the central area, or a fast way out when you're done, from where you can painlessly reach another part of the level. Probably the 2 objectives spaced furthest apart from one another are the Lurker-infested cave and the Flood section that you need to complete in order to open the Lurker Fortress. But once you leave the Lurker-infested cave, you have like 3 options of routes you could take to reach the Flood part. What's awesome is that none of these routes take up a significant amount of time, and all of them contain collectibles or something else important to a larger mission, so if there's a route between that and the central area you have not taken before, you can take it now. And guess what? Once you're done with the Flood to open the Lurker Fortress, a new shortcut is created that takes you right back to the same central area in a matter of seconds. Seriously, the construction of Snowy Mountain is ace. It's probably the largest and most open-ended stage up to this point in terms of what order you can complete objectives and collect stuff in, which by itself is already marvelous, and the efficiency at which this is possible is the icing on the cake. There are other things I like about this stage as well. Anything featuring Flood automatically gets my genitals tingling, and its section has pretty cool and intimidating platforming, despite it being less scary than it may initially appear. It's just such a stinker. This is the last we see of the Flood. I'm not kidding, only 2 sections with the birdie are in the whole journey, which is very disappointing, considering his screen time in both cases feels like it's over before I want it to be. To soften the pain, you can get Flood outside of his intended area through a glitch, which absolutely breaks the stage, yet is super satisfying regardless. It is no replacement for more actual content catered to the bird, though. Anyway, another reason I greatly enjoy Snowy Mountain is because this is the point where the environments are becoming considerably more lethal. In many cases, gone are the safety nets like swamp water for failing a jump. While there are still spots you merely fall down and have to carry yourself back out of, you're on a mountain, you know, so potential for falling off the map is much higher than before. The difficulty isn't merely increased by more pits either, as the lengths of many gaps and heights of many jumps have expanded far enough that a double jump plus spin kick or long jump is necessary to make it. This is not really, or at least not often seen in any level before, so it's clear that the developers expected players to have a finer grasp of the nuances of the controls and mechanics by now. The Lurker Fortress is also pretty cool, as it doesn't see you just swinging on poles like in Boggy Swamp, but you now gotta time your jumps off of poles correctly in addition, or save a shoddy attempt with a spin kick to land on moving platforms. Making mistakes is more punishing too, as you'll have to do at least half of the obstacle course again, rather than take a hit and carry on from there. The ice physics further add to the trickiness of Snowy Mountain. Ice physics in the grand scheme have kind of a bad rep, one of the reasons being that they force you to get used to altered movement of the main character, but as long as they aren't janky and unpolished like Jay's reviews video on this game, I simply view ice physics as another gimmick to add onto the pile. After all, a large part of keeping level design in platformers diversified and engaging is continuing to introduce new gimmicks. It's not like you'll have to learn a whole new mechanic with its own intricacies here. Jack's moveset and abilities remain very much the same, so it's merely a matter of adjusting to the twist put on your momentum. And there is enough ice in safe spaces for players to do just that before moving on to harder sections. What is unfortunate is that the ice physics are only used as a means of hindering players, as in players need to accustom and account for the effects they have on Jack. Landing on these precursor blockers surrounded by force fields that knock you back is only turned into a proper platforming task due to the ice physics, and it works fine in my opinion. That said, the ice physics could also have been used in ways where players must manipulate them as a tool to their advantage. The simplest concept to achieve something like that would be to have players build up speed on the ice to cross gaps impossible without the extra momentum, and then pull back as soon as they land on the next slippery platform to prevent themselves from sliding off. It's a missed potential with the ice physics worth bringing attention to. They are kind of tossed in the most rudimentary fashion possible, but thankfully the ice physics never become too frustrating to handle, so they're not a horrible sin or anything. The other stage connected to the volcanic crater is Spider Cave, and just like Snowy Mountain, I don't quite see what makes this a lesser level compared to all the others. In fact, I think it's pretty dope and another one of my favorites. This begins with the foreboding atmosphere. Dark eco is everywhere here in the form of big-ass pools, but it's also coming from various creatures, such as the spiders, and the place has a very muted color palette, with subdued greens and blues being most predominant. At the same time, I don't find the environment boring to look at whatsoever because there are brighter sources around. Think of the torches placed here and there, the yellow eco vents that can be spotted from miles away, and the crystals along the walls emitting some green or blue light. It's certainly the darkest level, but the artists managed to make it visually striking in spite of that due to their excellent yet sparse use of contrast in tiny elements. The music deserves credit as well, blending into the mood and setting graciously with the church bells and twisted, distorted cellos behind the intimidating bass.
Honey, I know.
An outstanding atmosphere doesn't make an outstanding stage by itself, of course, but Spider Cave is also very good in the gameplay department. It's probably the most punishing and difficult stage of the entire game, which is quite appropriate since this is likely to be the last area people visit before they proceed on to Gaul and Maya. The central chamber is massive and has many of these spider webs that act like trampolines to get you to higher areas, and a good amount of collectibles and objects are to be reached by jumping between all of these floating precursor platforms platforms. They move around quite a bit, some of them up and down, some of them left and right, some of them diagonally, and screwing up a jump could well have you falling into a pit or down to the bottom floor, forcing you to make your way back up again. This central chamber then connects to two other interesting sections in Spider Cave, the first being the one in near pitch black. The idea is that you light up the area by smacking these crystals that emit a green glow upon being hit, and you have to reach the next crystal quick enough or else you'll be squinting your eyes to know where the fuck you're even going. I wish the section went on a touch longer and wouldn't be as afraid to actually throw you in the dark. There was certainly more tension and time pressure in some of Crash's limited light challenges, but it's a neat gimmick regardless that puts the lighting engine to competent use beyond eye candy. The room with the precursor robot the lurkers are building for Gal and Maya though, this is the best one, centering around overcoming a gigantic obstacle course. There are so many gaps to clear, a variety of hazards to avoid, collapsing platforms to deal with, enemies with drill dozers interfering, and making a mistake anywhere can again have you returning to an earlier part of the obstacle course, or reset to the very beginning if you're unlucky enough to drop to the bottom. It's not mega hard to clear or anything, but it's not to be underestimated either, because impatience and careless actions can cost a lot of time trying to make your way back to where you were. So many elements come together remarkably well here, with the pool of gimmicks and hazards mixing and matching to create something that tests the player's precision with the controls and their sense of timing on top of that. Spider Cave in general feels like it gives concepts that won't return anymore their final push of difficulty, such as the pole swinging, which now occasionally requires players to drop downwards to a pole below them as well. This is considerably trickier work than any pole swinging done before, because there is no safety net in the form of spinning in midair when you launch yourself straight down, and finagling yourself through surrounding poles you don't want to grab onto when trying to move down isn't quite so simple. Yellow Eco gets its send-off here for on-foot use too, if you don't count the final boss, but please disregard that for the sake of me making this argument. Whereas in Boggy Swamp and during the Claw boss fight you could unleash the fireballs like a maniac, in Spider Cave you have to actively aim in first person mode, up, down, left and right, to snipe off all the bugs crawling along their pillars. You're gonna have to find suitable vantage points as well as calculate where to shoot your Yellow Eco in order to hit the bugs successfully, because they speed up more and more the closer they are to being obliterated. I know people tend to not be fond of this mission, but I can get behind it for the reason it gives Yellow Eco a good challenge beyond blindly button mashing. Another Yellow Eco application here I really like is how you have to carry the power up into different rooms where Yellow Eco is not available in order to destroy some crates with precursor orbs. And this is then taken to its logical limit when you have to take Yellow Eco from out of Spider Cave into Volcanic Crater to blow up a steel box that contains a power cell. This power cell is sweet because it requires genuine out-of-the-box thinking to nab, in addition to being quick on your feet to make it to a volcanic crater with enough Yellow Eco juice. I vividly remember discovering this one without resorting to a guide, and it was the most gratifying experience, finally 100% completing the game by myself. What I consider perhaps most impressive about Spider Cave though is how open-ended it manages to be without sacrificing platforming quality. Taking the precursor robot room as an example, there are many different ways to reach various set pieces, all with their own precursor orbs and maybe even scout flies. You can take the obvious starting point via this bridge, but you can also long jump from there to another part of the obstacle course. You can take the trolleys in the upper right corner of the room to switch between floors immediately, and you can even go to the group of poles on the left side here, which then starts you further at the top and you work your way from there. This isn't even mentioning that the floors themselves can branch off, so they're not all even connected at one end. The central chamber I've talked about before is similarly open-ended, being kind of a circle with stuff to do and find at many heights and different locations. I simply love having so many options on where to go next, because it means that no playthrough is ever the same unless you carefully plan out the fastest one you can find and practice it, which can also be satisfying to do in its own way. Thankfully, this is something most stages in the game do quite well. Spider Cave and Snowy Mountain simply do it best though. Spider Cave is not as intertwined and efficient to travel across as Snowy Mountain, I will say that, but that may be for the better. Spider Cave is large and relatively complex already, to the point that newcomers are likely to find it a bit confusing to navigate and can get lost. While I think the section with the precursor robot is well designed in that regard and shouldn't be problematic, the central chamber could have used more recognizable landmarks and set pieces to help players identify more comfortably where they are and where another place they want to go to is in relation to them. This is definitely an issue with Spider Cave, and if that's the reason people aren't too keen on the stage, I can totally understand that. There's also no doubt in my mind that many have felt frustration scouring the stage for a few remaining precursor orbs they've overlooked. Heck, I went through that pain myself. One spot is troublesome in particular, with eggs floating above this swinging pole. Chances are you missed these entirely due to the camera angle of all things obscuring them. One could notably fall for this if they're playing in 16:9 widescreen, because rather than extending the viewing area to the sides, the setting in reality chops a certain amount off the top and bottom of the image. It's as if it's zoomed in. 4:3, for that reason, technically gives you the superior play experience, but keep in mind that the cutscenes are letterboxed in 4:3 mode, since all the shots are composed in 16:9, so there is a trade-off. Unfortunately, camera controls are not gonna compensate for you on this front, because tilting the right analog stick up or down zooms in and out on Jack respectively, rather than panning the camera up or down. Such a zoom function has no practical use for anything, so I don't know why they did it that way, but to be completely fair, this is the only conspicuous problem I've encountered with the camera. And it getting trapped on something once in a blue moon, I guess? While I would have rather had true widescreen and the ability to point the camera up and down, the game seems to be designed with these quirks in mind for the most part. Alright, once you've collected a total of 72 power cells, the ability to travel to the final area, Golemaya Citadel, finally opens. This is done through the lava tube, which is the last of 3 linear zoomer levels. The difficulty is ramped up once again, with more pitfalls and narrower paths to ride on, and the road often splits into at least 2. These splits are put to decent use by having collectibles on only one of the routes, meaning you'll have to pay attention to which side you're taking, or turn around and go back in case you missed something. The process of this could easily lead to the zoomer overheating, especially since the distances you traverse without cool spots are considerably larger than in Fire Canyon. What's odd though is that the first half is the most dangerous, with the second half containing far less heated ground. I definitely would have liked to see the time limit be stricter here, encouraging players to keep picking the right routes with cooling balloons on them, or the longest jumps into the air to cool off as much as possible that way. Alas, there's no reason to think about where you're going in the latter half of the level, so you can do whatever you want, really. Nonetheless, longitude is a fine for a zoomer. As we approach the Citadel, Kira informs us that time is almost up, with lurker armies growing steadily across the land, and that her father has now been kidnapped by Golemaya as well. So nobody's surprised, your job is to fight your way through the Citadel and rescue Samos, in addition to all the other sages that have been kidnapped before Daxter was even turned into an Ottsel. The plan then is to combine the power of the 4 sages once freed to destroy the force field surrounding the precursor robot that Golemaya want to use to open the Dark Eco silos. I find it odd that you only now see the various other eco stages. To me, it would have been cool had you found each one as you reach their corresponding huts, and then they are kidnapped by Golemaya behind the heroes' backs whenever they ventured off to the next hub. The sages are not earth-shattering characters or whatever, but some of them seem quirky enough that it'd be cute to run into them as you progress your journey across the continent.
I'm gonna give Golemaya a little payback for this embarrassment. Then we'll see about cooking up some muskrat stew.
Now, from a level design perspective, the Citadel is fairly simplistic. Essentially, 90% of the stage is a gigantic abyss with only small walkways to get around on, and big, circular platforms spinning around at different speeds to jump between. It is treacherous for sure, and you'll have to be pretty good with Jack's moveset to avoid falling into the nothingness below, but nonetheless the challenges are pretty straightforward. Besides that, each of the 3 sages is locked behind an obstacle course, and these can be taken on in any order you like through the center room. There's really no advantage to doing one over the other first, since they're all linear paths with their own separate, self-contained challenges, but the choice to pick where you want to go next is cool, I guess. The Yellow Sage route is the concept of the Blue Eco launch pads, for some reason, taken to its limit, seeing Jack being launched over an enormous black pit with only 2 or so moving launching pads available to rest on and proceed from each time. The timing is overall forgiving, so it's not as tough of a task as it sounds, but going through this makes you feel like a badass nonetheless, and it is a decent way to give the Blue Eco launch pads one last push of difficulty. The Red Sage path is another one of those combat ambushes, and I've set my piece on those, although it is cool that you at least have to figure out to take down the lurker generators, or else you cannot move on. Lastly, there is the Blue Sage course, which comes down to more platforming with very, very few safe places. It's punishing in the sense that dying at any point sends you back to the beginning, but other than that, there is little in the way of complexity. It's simply bigger gaps. There may be a fire hazard interfering here and there, but it's nothing we haven't dealt with before. To be honest, I think Golemaya Citadel is a bit underwhelming. I'm not necessarily talking about the stage being relatively easy either. It's simply that it isn't all that imaginative and only escalates difficulty in the simplest ways possible. I mean, yeah, the Blue Eco Launchpad stuff is neat, but is that really all they could come up with? A giant black hole and some launch pads here and there? Similarly, the platforming in the Blue Sage course could have been longer and more involved. I, for one, know I would rather have had damn tricky timing and precision obstacles with checkpoints sprinkled around, rather than this dull, short shit with no checkpoints. The only gimmick that's kinda clever is the one where players must jump on color-coded platforms, and every time they land on a certain color, that means all platforms of the same color disappear. It's nothing too major, but making it across and collecting all orbs along the way without dying requires some pre-planning of where to land with each jump, which is a nice touch and involves more than just wide, large gaps and throwing as many foes at the player at once as possible. The stage could have benefited from more unique gimmicks like this, I think, and taken them to the next level, you know? And this is kind of a point of contention for all of Jak and Daxter though. Throughout this video, I've highlighted for various stages how I think this concept and that idea could have been evolved more. It's by far the most noticeable in Golemaya Citadel, but it would have been neat if Boggy Swamp took more advantage of its linear design. It would have been neat if Flut Flut made appearances more often. It would have been neat had the ice physics in Snowy Mountain been used in more creative ways. It would have been neat if there were more forms of eco, or if the existing ones were pushed further, and you could go on for a little longer. This is by no stretch of the imagination a deal breaker. I mean, a lot of games fall short of reaching their ultimate potential and properly exploring all the great ideas that they have if you analyze them to pieces like I do, but yeah, it does feel to me like this adventure could have been fleshed out a tad more with level gimmicks pushed further, and also an overall higher difficulty. Now, maybe I'm saying that last part purely out of an adult perspective. After all, Jak and Daxter is meant for players of all ages and skill sets, but not nearly all missions are necessary to be completed in order to progress and ultimately reach the final boss, you know? I don't think it would have hurt to include some significantly harder power cell objectives here and there that players who are not skilled enough can totally skip over, while those who want the extra challenge can stretch their platforming legs and get their balls busted. The Crash games, all of the OG trilogy, are certainly more challenging to 100% than Jak and Daxter, and they achieved exactly that by having the optional side content like special routes and time trials being more difficult. What Jak does have over Crash, to be fair, is that intricate moveset, which, as I've talked about before, can make even the simplest of objectives and stages challenging and interesting for those who want to achieve certain goals in unintended ways, or perhaps even speedrun. The skill floor is low if you're playing the game casually, but the skill ceiling is surprisingly high if you're looking to master it. What's absolutely worth mentioning as well is that a part of why Jak and Daxter feels as easy as it does is how well designed it is. The controls are smooth as butter and responsive, there is no live system, and there's barely anything present in terms of cheap enemy placement and general unforeseeable bullcrap. Checkpoints are also plentiful, which means you never lose much progress in case you do kick the bucket. This sometimes does come at a bit of a cost, like in Golemaya Citadel with the color-coded platforms. If you die during those sections, the orbs you've collected stay in your pocket, and all the platforms respawn, so that really diminishes the intensity of the gimmick. But for the most part, the game being forgiving works very well, and the benefits to be had are equally as valid. Even though there are genuinely hard games out there, without a doubt, there are also that owe a lot of their difficulty to the wrong reasons, and you have to wonder whether that's any better than a relatively easy, but very fair and accessible title like Jak and Daxter. And it's not that you'll never miss jumps, fail missions, or outright die. You more than likely will, You just won't think much of it due to the lack of sizable punishments. Are you still awake over there, buddy? I hope so, because we are finally reaching the home stretch of the game, and this video is thus also the end of my voiceover sessions. Goddamn, dude, I want to be done. Once all the sages in Golemaya Citadel are rescued, your efforts turn out to be to no avail, as the precursor robot is ready to launch and break open the Dark Eco silos. The final boss is now upon us, and it's surely the best boss in the game, where the Dark Eco plant and claw only sport 1 or 2 attacks and then ramp up the intensity each cycle. Golemaya give you a new attack to observe and overcome every cycle as you are shooting Owen Wilson's nose with yellow eco. Wow. This goes a long way to keeping the fight engaging for the time it lasts, and though it stays in line with the tame difficulty level of the overall adventure, you do have to stay on your toes and react decently if you want to win. In spite of that, it's a fair final boss with well-telegraphed attacks, plus it uses the actual base mechanics. I'm glad Naughty Dog never made the same mistake again as they did with Crash 2. As a matter of fact, the showdown with Golemaya may be one of the best boss battles, if not the best boss battle, Naughty Dog had created up to that point, but considering the Crash games largely had average to weak bosses, that ain't saying a bunch. The quality of the spectacle on display here is impressive, however, and it's not surprising this is the same developer that would go on to create the Uncharted series. The premise of fighting Golemaya in the very moment that they are attempting to break open silos that you are walking on is a pretty epic setting by Collectathon standards, and every time Golemaya drop a bomb on the silos to break it open further and further, you'll be launching Jack high into the air off of a blue eco pad, watching those explosions reveal more and more of the dark eco inside. What is perhaps my favorite and most nostalgic piece of music in the game sells it all, which is also a good demonstration of a dynamic soundtrack at work. In this case, instruments are layered over with each attack cycle. As the boss comes to a close, the combined power of the green, blue, red, and yellow sages creates light eco. This is the type of eco that could turn Daxter back to his original form, but he has to consider between that and saving the world. Daxter finally does something that isn't purely self-centered, albeit not heartily, and opts for the choice of using the light eco to destroy Golemaya. This part makes no sense to me though. Multiple balls of light eco drop from the sage's powers before delivering the final blow, and even then, couldn't the substance be created again now that all the sages are free? I mean, I get it, they wanted to keep the guy the furball he is for the possibility of sequels, but the writing should have given a more believable reason as to why this trade-off had to be made in order to save the world. Regardless, the precursor robot gets obliterated, Golemaya sink into the depths of the Dark Eco silos, and Jack and Daxter do their little victory dance on the way back to the rest of the crew. Samos hints at Golemaya probably not being dead, and then the credits roll after a really cruel interruption by Daxter.
Wow! Put it on ice, big guy!
Assuming you've collected at least 100 out of 101 power cells, a post-credit scene plays where an ancient precursor door is open to reveal a stunning light. Then the game returns to the title screen. It's a fine way to close the curtains and have a sequel be able to go wherever the developers would want, but it's definitely a disappointment from the perspective of going the extra mile to amass practically all the power cells. It's a very common collectathon problem to hand out completely unsatisfactory rewards for completion, and though I mainly 100% collectathons because of intrinsic motivations, I am not going to excuse Jack and Daxter for a lack of extrinsic value. Crash Team Racing has a variety of unlockables like new courses, characters, and a neat scrapbook video showing the history and course of the franchise. And in Jak 2, 3, and X, you can unlock cheat codes, a level select, the ability to rewatch all their cutscenes in a new Game Plus mode, depending on how many collectibles you've got. And this original installment seems as though it should have contained at least some of the extras listed above as well, because the development cycle was probably long enough to allow for that. Alas, we have to do without any fancy smancy bonuses here. On the surface, the Precursor Legacy may not impress much anymore these days. People have said that the characters you meet and the world you explore feel boring and lacking of context compared to platforming contemporaries like Banjo-Kazooie and Sly Cooper, or even when stacked against Jak 2 and 3 directly, and very little about the core gameplay is revolutionary or innovative here. I can definitely understand those complaints, and the game also isn't particularly long, in addition to the fact I think the level design, as well as a handful of mechanics like the Fluff, Flood, and Eco, have missed potential in some ways. All the same, Jak and Daxter is a very good title in my opinion, on the ground that it is such a solid and consistent experience all the way through, with practically no low points. From the minimal amount of backtracking to nearly each stage having tons of platforming and obstacles to overcome, and from the strong difficulty curve to the large absence of poor design to the major focus on one playstyle, the game is rarely ever frustrating and instead easy to pick up and play. And then 100% complete all over again. Sure, yeah, I may not enjoy Precursor Basin and Boggy Swamp as much as the rest of the adventure, but by all accounts they are still decent stages, and if there are objectives or levels you really cannot stand, chances are high you can ignore them because you don't need nearly all power cells to progress. It's an undisputed crime cutscenes cannot be skipped. That's one of my biggest personal gripes overall, to be honest, but I can get over that if I have to. If you've never played Jak and Daxter before, I wholly recommend giving it a shot, folks, collectathon aficionado or not. Notwithstanding character models in cutscenes, it has aged delightfully in its presentation, and it plays just as well as it did back when it was released, including that amazingly engineered, interconnected world almost entirely free of loading. There are of course things other collectathons do better or have over this game, but the Precursor Legacy is one of the most straightforward and bullshit free to play and complete within the genre, and that's worth a lot.
I agree. I'm gonna keep it that simple.
Hello, my name is Jak. After doing it with Kingdom Hearts, everyone seems to want it to become a thing, so I'm going to make it a thing. I'm going to try and make more videos that summarise the plots and series of different games, especially the longer and more complex ones, but I'm going to start off with something nice and simple, something I'm kind of familiar with. So if you're a fan of this, you might enjoy this. If you're not, then here's an introduction to it. But of course, spoilers, I probably should have mentioned that in my Kingdom Hearts one, but I didn't, and the title does speak for itself, but just so you know, I am going to go through the entire plot of series when I do this. So here is a complete recap of the Jak and Daxter series. Now, I didn't think I would need to mention this in the Kingdom Hearts one, but apparently I did for a couple of people, so I'm going to say it now. Jak and Daxter is a video game series. You can find it on the PlayStation 2 or the PlayStation 3 where a high-definition collection was made for it. Our story begins in Sandover Village, where we find a young boy called Jak living there under the wing of an old man named Samos. Living with Jak are his best friend Daxter and Samos' daughter Kira. One night, Jak and Daxter disobey Samos' instructions and head off to the treacherous Misty Island. While they're there, they come across an army of lurkers. Lurkers are a bunch of violent, lumbering creatures that seem to make up the entire wildlife of Jak and Daxter's world. Swell. Seeing two mysterious figures leading this army for what seems to be evil purposes, they back away and find a large pool of dark eco. Eco is a substance in this world that comes in various forms, colours and powers. They can do all sorts of things and are generally used as a sort of energy or fuel source in the world. Those who can channel and use the power of eco and understand it are called sages. Samos himself is a green sage for green eco, whereas Jak seems to be able to channel just about any use of eco. He's a bit of a young sage in the making, as it were. Daxter, not so much. You see, out of all the eco, dark eco is one of the most powerful and most dangerous and most unpredictable substances. Daxter ends up falling in it when they get attacked by a lurker, and he pops out as a little furry orange thing called an ottsel, a cross between an otter and a weasel. The two boys return back to their home and tell Samos what happened, and, well, Daxter does, since Jak doesn't really talk. And together they decide to set off north to where Gaul lives. Gaul is a dark eco sage, and with his help they might be able to turn Daxter back to normal, which is what they currently want. And Kira offers to help them with her mechanical prowess, building a zoomer, which is capable of flying across molten lava with a heat shield, which requires power cells, and so they have to collect them. They travel up to Rock Village, which is under attack by lurkers, and the Blue Sage, which governs the village, was building a way to sort out the problem, but he disappeared. So they have to fix the machine using power cells, which they again have to collect, and fight off the giant lurker that's terrorizing the village, and proceed. Proceed, that is, to the volcanic crater where the Red Sage lives. But the Red Sage is missing too. It turns out that Gaul was the mysterious figure at the beginning of the game. He and his sister Maya have been twisted by Dark Eco and are using a precursor robot to try and drill their way into the silos, a deep, massive storage of Dark Eco which they plan to flood the world with, which would leave it in total ruin and chaos and darkness. Oh yes, the precursors. The precursors are said to be the most powerful beings in the universe, supposed to be responsible for a lot of technology and all the eco in the world. They're effectively what gave the planet life and are supposed to have disappeared long ago, and Samos is kind of obsessed with discovering the mystery behind the precursors. In order to power their precursor robot, Gaul and Maya have been kidnapping the sages and draining their power. And sure enough, by the time Jack and Daxter make it to their citadel through the use of collecting more power cells, they also find that Samos has been kidnapped as well. Can't leave him alone for 5 minutes. Despite how weird they all are, Jack and Daxter are able to rescue the sages and stop them from charging the robot any further, but it's too late. Gaul and Maya already have enough power and begin to open up the silos. Jack and Daxter face off against them using the powers of the various eco and are able to thwart their plans, destroy the robot, and send Gaul and Maya straight into the silos. So I guess they got what they wanted. In the process, Daxter gives up the possibility of turning back to normal through the use of white eco, which Jack uses instead to destroy the robot. It would be kind of tragic, but Daxter's pretty happy. So in the end, the day is saved, Gaul and Maya are stopped, and Jack and Kira almost kiss. Then they discover a giant gate on top of Gaul and Maya's citadel. Through the use of collecting more power cells, they're able to open the gate and discover a massive rift gate. A gate within a gate. And a Rift Rider.
Oh my goodness.
You
can't.
haven't guessed from the name. The Rift Gate seems to be a portal into other realms. Space, time, not entirely sure, but the Rift Rider interacts with it. And after a bit of time, Kira's able to figure it all out. And together, the bunch of them decide to set off through the gate after accidentally opening it to a swarm of giant beasts called the Metalheads, which are basically monsters. Monsters who apparently have a long-standing rivalry / animosity with the Precursors. So after accidentally releasing the greatest threat to life as we know it, and the possible creators of the planet's worst enemies into the world, Jack and the gang just shoot into the Rift Gate, end up getting separated, and crash into this strange world. This strange new place is Haven City. It's a massive city surrounded by wastelands and large walls which keep out the Metalhead invasion. The Metalheads run rampant in this world. Good luck to anyone who travels outside the walls where you could possibly get slaughtered by the Metalheads. The city relies on the oppressive rule of Baron Praxis to keep them at bay, and Baron Praxis is not a very nice man. In this world, the weak die and the strong survive. Oi, stop it. Jack is almost immediately apprehended by the friendly Crimson Guard. Baron Praxis' very sweet police force. Their motto is, surrender and die. Over the next 2 years, Daxter runs around the city telling bar stories and trying to find a way to save Jack. Mostly telling bar stories, though. Eventually, though, he manages to hook up with an extermination company, and using his connections with them, he's able to find a way into the prison and save Jack, who has been tortured for 2 years by being injected with Dark Eco. Long story short, Baron Praxis was desperate for an advantage against the Metalheads in their war, so he tried to create the Dark Warrior program. By infusing soldiers with Dark Eco, he hoped to turn one of them into a dark-powered super soldier. And so far, Jack is the only project that actually survived the experiments, and even then he showed no signs of change. It's a bit like Captain America, only longer, more painful, less successful, and a higher death rate. Luckily for Jack, Daxter arrives to save him, though the most he does is rouse him, and that causes Jack to find his voice at last.
Say something! Just this once!
I'm gonna kill Praxis.
Not only that, but the Dark Warrior program was a success! Yay! So Jack turns into Dark Jack for the first time, breaking out of prison alongside Daxter, and they immediately run into Core, an old man with a mysterious kid who's apparently very important due to that necklace around his neck. And by the way, this meeting was not a coincidence, as you'll find out later. Jack wrestles with his darker alter ego and is very much keen to get some revenge on Praxis, so he joins the Underground Movement, a faction which is against the Crimson Guard and Baron Praxis and everything he stands for, and plans to overthrow him and take over the city to save it and put the rightful heir on the throne, since Baron Praxis is the usurper in the first place, and of course, save it from the Metalheads. Spearheading a lot of their missions is a man called Torn with a very gruff voice, who's ex-Crimson Guard and hates Baron Praxis with all his soul. Isn't he the most popular Baron ever? The leader of the Underground is a mysterious figure known as the Shadow, who Jack and Daxter don't get to meet for a while, but in the meantime they get put in touch with a few other contacts, such as Tess, a lively young lady who works for the Underground and Daxter is very fond of, and surprisingly she's very fond of Daxter. There's also Onin, a very old and very wise soothsayer. Her interpreter is Pecker, who speaks for her, and Pecker, yes, is a Muncaw, a cross between a monkey and a maycaw. and he and Daxter have a very vicious rivalry. There's also Vin, a paranoid geek who's apparently the only person managing the city's power, keeping the shield wall up, as the shield wall is the only thing that keeps the metalheads out, really. And Ashlyn, an old friend of Torch who still works in the Crimson Guard and apparently has a sort of thing with him. Jack and Daxter also start picking up jobs from a man called Crew, a bit of an underlord who knows a lot of what's going on in the city and provides Jack with a bit of information in exchange for the odd job. Allies of Crew that Jack and Daxter are also put in touch with is Sig, a mercenary from the Wasteland who hunts metalheads for fun, or a living, and a mysterious mechanic who Jack and Daxter do a few races for and decide to enter the Grand Prix in order to get a visit to the palace because they really want to meet Praxis again. So as their journey progresses, Jack and Daxter use the Dark Jack powers, new guns, and a jetboard sort of skateboard type thing in order to fight against the Crimson Guard and the metalheads while doing missions for everyone and thickening the plot. As it turns out, the mysterious kid, the amulet around his neck, possibly means he's the heir of Mar, which means he's the rightful ruler of Haven City. You see, Mar is this legendary hero who apparently held off the metalheads, built Haven City and the eco-power grid and the mines. Yeah, one man pulled off the impossible. The legends might be a bit exaggerated. However, he was supposed to be a very close friend to the precursors, so anyway, his lineage continued the rule of Haven City until one of his successors was overthrown by Baron Praxis, who was the lieutenant of that successor. However, the kid is possibly the rightful heir to the throne, and that's probably why Baron Praxis wants him so badly. Jack was picked up possibly by mistake of being the kid, and, well, it got worse from there. See, in a really big plot twist, it turns out the world they're in is not some sort of alternate world or a strange place. They are actually in the future. Jack and Daxter recognise that this is their world in the future after it fell to the metalheads. And there's even more plot twist, because it turns out the mysterious mechanic is Kira, and the Shadow, the leader of the Underground, is Samos the Sage, only he seems a lot younger and has no idea who Jack and Daxter is. Jack and Daxter also unearth a very suspicious conspiracy between Baron Praxis and the Metalhead leader. The two of them have a deal going, where Baron Praxis supplies them with eco, and the Metalheads will continue to attack the city only a little bit, enough to satisfy the city that they think that Baron Praxis is indeed protecting him, and keeping Baron Praxis elected. So yeah, that's why he's so popular. But unfortunately it's not really going to last, because the city is running out of eco, and the Metalheads, they're getting tired of pretending. Brief side note, for those of you who are wondering whatever happened to the Lurkers. Well, without Gol and Maya's influence, the Lurkers aren't actually that bad, but Baron Praxis is using them as slave labour. You actually help a very sophisticated and civilised Lurker called Bruter to free some of his pals, and Bruter promises to repay Jack and Daxter whenever the time is right. As things progress, the legends of a precursor stone start reaching the pointy/fuzzy ears of Jack and Daxter. You see, the precursor stone is said to be the last precursor egg that Mar hid away from the Metalheads and the city. No one really knows where it is, but Baron Praxis is searching for it, because with this fragile deal he's got running with the Metalheads, he really needs an ace in the hole to get rid of him for good, and the Precursor Stone just might have the power to do that. Unfortunately, he plans to use it to detonate it in the Metalhead nest, which would release enough power to destroy everything. So everybody's racing to find the Precursor Stone first. Jack and Daxter manage to get the Seal of Mar and use it to unearth Mar's tomb, where the Precursor Stone is said to be, and then they enter the tomb alone, passing the test of manhood in order to get at the Precursor Stone. But Baron Praxis followed them, kidnapping a lot of Jack and Daxter's pals, and he tries to get the Precursor Stone, and in a battle with Jack and Daxter, he succeeds. Jack and Daxter aren't able to stop him. It turns out that Torn turned them in order to save Ashlyn's life, so Jack and Daxter have to break into the fortress to save all their friends. Once they do, they discover that there are two Samos the Sages, the older one that they know, and the younger one who's working as the Shadow that they've been meeting all this time. Kira reveals that she's been working on a machine just like the Rift Rider that took them there in order to get them back to their own world once they find a Rift Gate in order to get there, but she's missing a few pieces, so Jack and Daxter have to go collect them. In the meantime, Jack and Daxter step up to the final race, the Grand Prix finale that will get them into the palace. A particularly dangerous rival in this race is Errol. He hates Jack with a passion. He worked for Baron Praxis as practically second in command, kind of Torn's replacement. He was part of the Dark Eco program, injecting Jack with the Dark Eco, and he's determined to finish him off in this race. Of course, Jack and Daxter win. Baron Praxis isn't very happy about that, to say nothing about what Errol felt about it. He tries to ram Jack, but instead crashes into the month's supply of Eco that he was awarded for winning, and Errol is, well, you know. So Jack and Daxter get into the palace. Plot twist, Ashlyn is Baron Praxis' daughter. Ashlyn confronts them, and Jack and Daxter have to convince her that her father is actually a bit of a psychopath. Fortunately, Ashlyn is a smart girl and is very aware of what Baron Praxis is like, and when she finds out that the Precursor Stone will destroy everything, she decides to help them. Through her help, Jack and Daxter make their way through a weapons facility full of like Crimson Guard robots and stuff, and on top they find Crew, who's built a massive piercer bomb that's going to destroy the Precursor Stone and the world, but mainly the nest, which is his target. After Jack and Daxter turn on him, they engage in a battle, which Crew loses, and he tries to detonate the bomb, blowing them all up with him. Fortunately, Ashlyn shows up in time to save them, and Crew's plan blows up in his face. Then they get back to Crew's place, where they find the other piece that's left to find for the Rift Rider is inside a machine. Daxter takes on the challenge and manages to get it, and once they do, they discover that the Metalheads have invaded the city. Thanks to the betrayal of both Core and Crew, the Metalheads were able to get in past the shield wall or through secret passages. In the midst of all this turmoil, they managed to attack Vin. Jack and Daxter go looking for Sig, who was sent underwater by Crew into some ruins. When Jack and Daxter find them, they find out that Sig was sent to unlock one of these passages and cause the Metalheads to stream in. The three of them fight their way out until Sig is ambushed by a Metalhead and disappears into a dark cavern. Between Sig and Vin, Jack and Daxter's friends are dropping like lurker flies. But before Vin dies, he sends Jack and Daxter one last message to go to the construction site. When they get there, they find that Baron Praxis is there alongside a few guards. And then Core Ninja jumps in, and turns out he's not an old man at all. He's the Metalhead leader, masquerading as an old man all this time. He and Baron Praxis have a confrontation where Baron Praxis is blown up because he tried to Leroy Jenkins the guy, and it didn't work, obviously. So Jack and Daxter are left with Baron Praxis, who reveals the location of the Precursor Stone, which is hidden in a second bomb, because, you know, always have a backup. With that, Baron Praxis passes away, leaving the Precursor Stone in Jack and Daxter's hands. You know, with all these plot twists, I could make a reference to M. Night Shyamalan, but I won't. Everybody gathers in the stadium, and the Rift Rider is finally finished, and they're ready to go back to their own time, but they need another Rift Gate, or Rift Ring, which they came in the first place. And apparently, the only one in this world is somewhere in the Metalhead nest. In order to get there, Bruto shows up and offers the gang the help of his lurker balloons, which will help carry the Rift Rider there. In the meantime, Jack and Daxter have to go to the nest beforehand and do a bit of spring cleaning. Using Mars' final weapon, Jack and Daxter power it with the Precursor Stone in order to blast a hole in the Metalhead nest. And gung-ho, well, at least one of them is, they charge into the Metalhead nest, or at least one of them does, and they face off against Metal Core. You know, I think despite all the plot twists, the story's been pretty easygoing, wouldn't you agree? Oh, by the way, the kid that Core has...
Whoa, Jesus
Christ! That's Jack from the future. Come on! Metal Core explains that the kid is indeed Jack from the future, who was sent into the past through that rift gate that Jack and Daxter are looking at right now, which will take him into the past where Jack grows up into Jack. The kid is sent back in time to become Jack, who then comes forward in time to meet his younger self here and now. But unfortunately, Jack's gonna die because of Core, and Core will feast on the Precursor Stone, which is the last Precursor egg, an actual Precursor, which was defended by Mar from the Precursor's mortal enemy, the Metalhead. So Jack's the heir of Mar. Isn't that cool? M. Night Shyamalan would be proud. So let's get to the good bit. Core dies, the kid wakes up the Precursor Stone, and an actual Precursor is revealed to everyone, who heads through the Rift Gate and promises Jack that the darkness inside him that's been tormenting him through the entire game has been balanced out by light, so Jack won't be destroyed by his own darkness, which was a kind of a subplot that I ignored. So young Jack and young Samos head back in time to the place where they will grow into the people that we know and love today, and then Jack and Daxter and everyone head back to Haven City, which is clear of Metalheads after Metal Core's death. Without Luda, they kind of fell apart. Ashlyn is elected governess, and Torn's like her partner and all that. They have a nice party, but they mourn their losses. But it turns out Sig's alive. Sig shows up to celebrate with them all, and Jack and Daxter are all happy, and everything goes well, and Jack and Kira almost kiss. When you think about it though, there's some paradoxes in there. Like Jack's name. How do we know his name's Jack? It just sort of, it's just a name he has, and they think that the kid's name is Jack because the older version that they've met is called Jack, so that's why he's called Jack, but no one actually named him Jack. And then there's, of course, Kira's Rift Rider. She built that off memory, even though it's the same Rift Rider, the exact same Rift Rider that she saw, which she's basing the Rift Rider design she built off of. And, well, anyway, you get the point. Let's not waste our time on this. Now, you think after all that chaos, everything would be plain sailing, but no. Over the course of the next year, the palace is destroyed when there's a massive war breaking out across the entire city between the combined Underground and Crimson Guard, which has become the Freedom League, the Metalheads, who have survived, some of them have survived and taken over the west side of the city, and the Crimson Guard robots, which take over the industrial section. The Crimson Guard robots have just swarmed the city through a floating war factory, which hovers over the entire city for the entirety of this war. A mysterious new leader has arisen, uniting all of these factions against Haven City. But in the meantime, Jack and Daxter's worst enemy is politics, as the Grand Council of Haven City needs someone to blame. So they pin the whole thing on Jack, partly for his dark eco powers and his friendship with Crew and everything that went on in Jack 2. Jack is blamed as a scapegoat for the entire thing and cast out into the wasteland, into the desert, miles away from the city, wandering alone, well, with Daxter and Pecker, who tag along because Jack's their friend and they're not going to let him do it alone, which is really nice of them. But then they all seem to die. However, Ashlyn provided Jack with a beacon which alerts Damus, the leader of Spargus City, an entire community made out of people cast out from Haven City. They find Jack and Daxter and Pecker and bring them in. So Jack and Daxter settle into Spargus City, where they get to know Damus a bit and get nice and close with him, whereas Pecker decides to be Damus's new advisor and his relationship with Daxter does not improve. Jack and Daxter also run into this really ferocious racer called Cleaver that neither of which really get along with, as well as a monk called Seam, who I think is a woman. I think. So Damus gets proud of Jack, Cleaver wants to eat Daxter, and Seam doesn't like Jack's dark eco powers, not the first person to do so. However, over the course of the game and visiting temples, Jack starts to discover light eco powers and becomes Light Jack as well as Dark Jack, fully bringing out the balance. Ashlyn pops out to ask Jack to come back to Haven City and save everyone, but Jack is still ticked off about just getting kicked out like that and no one really standing by him other than Daxter and Pecker, so he chooses to stay with his new accustomed life in Spargus. But later he relents and decides to head back to Haven City anyway, where he encounters Count Viger, one of the guys who was very prominent in throwing Jack out. Count Viger is the head of the council in Haven City and is a very strong believer in light eco. He hates all darkness and all dark eco and refuses to see Jack as a hero because of it. Needless to say, he doesn't really get along with Jack and has a bit of a god complex because he wants to use the power of the precursors to save everyone and be a big hero, and no one likes him. Seriously, nobody likes him. You don't like him. I don't like him. But you know who we do all like? Sig! You know, for fun in Spargus, they like to pit people to the death against each other in arenas, and when this happens to Jack and Daxter and they come face to face with Sig, each side refuses to kill each other. Damus gets him into trouble for it, but they get let off, partly because Sig was a spy in Haven City, and he served Damus well for that. Later it turns out Sig was spying in Haven City looking for Damus's son, who was lost to him a long time ago. Jack and Daxter make it back to Haven City, where they end up in the port at the south side of the city, which is sealed off from the north side of the city by the Crimson Guard robots. And since they're penned in, Torn's down there, he's in command of Daxter's old pub, trying to keep everything together, but it looks like they're losing control and all hope is lost, but Jack comes in to save the day. In the meantime, it turns out this leader that's been gathering together all of the metalheads and the KG deathbots to attack the city and start this whole war is Errol. Errol survived his encounter with Jack and Daxter in Jak 2 and his explosion, and has survived as a cyborg that's taken control of the robots and made contact with the metalheads and got them all working together to try and destroy everything. It's safe to say Errol's got a few screws loose. You could also say he's just plain nuts. With Jak and Daxter's intervention, bit by bit they managed to win back Haven City from the metalheads and the KG deathbots, winning victory after victory, pushing back Errol's forces. But as this is all happening, they're constantly aware of a threat known as the Daystar, this bright star in the sky that Seam constantly prophesies about. Viger is also aware of this threat, and as it becomes closer and closer, it's discovered that this is the Dark Makers. When the precursors got a little too close to Dark Eco, they went insane and got twisted, and turned into the Dark Makers, who have their own form of basically evil, twisted precursor technology, which is manifested in this satellite, which is floating up in the shape of this star. It gets closer and closer to their planet every day, and as the Dark Maker threat looms, they threaten to destroy all life and basically the entire world, and Jak and Daxter are obviously going to have to stop it. No rest for the wicked. Yeah, and speaking of Count Viger...
It's Viger!
Yeah, whatever. He basically tries to blackmail everyone by saying, I've got the way to save the world, you can trust me, get rid of Jak. But everyone, of course, favours Jak, and Ashlyn basically fires the guy. It's pretty awesome. Now, there's a precursor weapon hidden deep in the Earth that's capable of counteracting this Daystar threat. It lies deep at the centre of the Earth, which can be reached through the catacombs, which are underneath Haven City, and in order to reach them, Viger was actually the one who destroyed the palace. He did so in order to get at the catacombs and at this weapon in the first place. So, yeah, what a jerk. As for Jak and Daxter, they've been collecting eco-crystals throughout their journey, and they use these to form an ecosphere capable of powering the weapon and using it to stop the threat. So, they head off into the catacombs, but in order to do so, they have to fight past waves of enemies, and they end up getting cornered by some Dark Makers. But Damus busts in to save the day, and they drive off together into the sunset before they get blown up. And Damus dies. But just before Damus dies, the tragic truth is revealed. You see, Damus was descended from Mars' family, as in he was the leader of Haven City before Baron Praxis betrayed him and cast him out, starting up Spargus City in the first place. As in the heir to Mar was Damus's long-lost son. As in the kid, as in Jak. Jak is Damus's son. The kid they found in Jak 2 and sent back into the past was Damus's kid. He grew up into Jak, and Jak is now cradling his dying father. Just before Jak can tell Damus that, Damus dies. But if you think that's the worst of it, then get this. Vigit.
It's Viger!
Nobody cares, because Vegan was the one who took the kid from Damus in the first place. That's how the kid ended up in Haven City for Jak 2. He was kidnapped by Vegan, and then he got lost to the underground. And there he is, standing over Jak, cradling his dead father's body, and he's gloating over the fact that Damus's dying wish was to find his son, never knowing that Jak was his son. So naturally, Jack and Daxter are very angry, and they go to chase Veigar into the catacombs in a bloodthirsty rage. So after all that drama, they reach the centre of the world, power up the weapon, and a precursor appears to Jack and thanks him for being such a great hero, and he offers him the chance to become a precursor. But they're interrupted by Veigar.
It's Veigar.
But that's what I said. Oh, forget it. Anyway, Veigar takes the power of Precursor have done for himself and points a gun at Jack, but the Precursors complain about the fact that Jack and Veigar and everybody were all too late. The Daystar's probably already going to destroy the world and everything's falling apart. Then the Precursor starts to argue with himself, and then the thing opens up and... Wait a minute. Yes, it turns out the legendary Precursors were just a bunch of otzels who fluffed up the myth and made everyone think that they were really cool just so that people would, actually worship them and take them seriously. But their tech's still pretty cool, and it's possibly that's why they're so powerful in the first place. Daxter's very happy, of course, but he complains that he doesn't have any clothes the way they do. And Veigar, well, he's less than overjoyed. In order to stop Errol from making any moves too quickly, the Precursors teleport Jack and Daxter up to the Darkmakers to stop them from attacking the planet before the Precursors can just shoot them. So they do that, and they fight Errol, and nothing happens, and the thing gets shot. And just before it blows up, Jack and Daxter manage to make it out, but not before Errol can get away. The Darkmakers and the ship have been completely destroyed, and yet Errol is still there with the piloting a giant mech left behind from them, and still plans to destroy whatever he can, because, let's face it, Errol's insane at this point. Jack and Daxter vow to stop him. For Damus. So they face Errol in an epic showdown, and Errol dies, they win the end. Happy days. Later, the Precursors are congratulating everyone on everything that's happened. Seamus is a bit baffled about the Precursors' true identity. Daxter has the chance to become a human again. They offer him a reward for all of his... Oh, he just wants pants. Okay. As for Tess is all pleased about Daxter's new pants, so the Precursors turn her into an Otzel as well. Seems fair. As for Veigar, he ends up with Cleaver as his own little sidekick. It's more than you deserve, So the day is saved, everybody's happy, and Daxter and Tess almost kiss. As for Jack, the Precursors are offering to take him up into the universe so Jack can be a hero to other worlds as well, which is pretty cool. Daxter chooses to stay behind, and so Jack decides to stay behind as well. The two of them are inseparable, and that's pretty darn cool. So they all cheerily smile and have a nice time, and yeah, that's the end of their adventure. It sure would be a shame if 1 year later they were called to a place called Kraz City to hear the reading of the will of a certain criminal underworld boss guy who Jack and Daxter may or may not have worked for and may or may not have killed afterwards. But that's what happened. Turns out Crew had a daughter, her name is Rain, and there is no family resemblance whatsoever. At the reading of the will, everyone has a little toast, and it turns out the toast was poisoned. Crew set the whole thing up so that everybody present would have to work for him as a combat racing team in order to win this big prize, and it turns out to be involved in some great big bet. You see, Crew's a big criminal family, and he was in a rivalry with another criminal family led by a guy called Mizo, who's a mysterious criminal underworld guy, and they had a massive bet going on involving the sport of combat racing, just driving and shooting basically. It's pretty good, so they got Jack and Daxter and everybody to help them out for the sake of this bet, and as the sport goes on, that's what they do, because they're poisoned, and in order to get the antidote, they have to finish the race and win. Rain claims not to have been in on it because she drank the poison as well, so she's clear, I guess, and Sig shows up to help them out, even though he hasn't been poisoned, because Sig's an awesome guy, don't ever forget it. The commentator for the entire sport is GT Blitz. He runs the whole thing in a sense, and he has to share the limelight with Pecker, who joins him as a commentator because Pecker wants to have a bit of a spotlight in order to shed some of his investigations into the criminal workings of this sport. And GT Blitz does not like sharing the spotlight. Jack and Daxter have to deal with Measles thugs such as Razor and UR86 and Cleaver. Yeah, Cleaver shows up and wants to best Jack and Daxter in this sport, but that doesn't work out for him. Jack and Daxter win race after race, beat all the guys, and everyone gets wiped out until they do the final race of the entire thing, and GT Blitz takes part in it. Turns out GT Blitz is Mizo. Who knew? Yeah, there was also a bit of a bonus thing because it turns out that GT Blitz's father was killed by Mizo's gang, so that implies that Mizo killed his own father, but that doesn't really matter because GT Blitz gets killed in the end anyway. He tried to steal the antidote, but Jack chased him down, shot him down, and took the antidote back. So once again, the day is saved. Everyone's cured of the poison, and everyone feels better about it. Rain turns out to have been in on it the whole time and was never actually poisoned to begin with, but she gets away and nobody really cares. And Jack and Kira almost kiss. No, wait, they do. They actually do kiss. Alright, cool. They actually do kiss. And that, my friends, is the end of the Jack and Daxter series so far. There hasn't been any other games since then. Nobody's made any other sort of a game to follow on from it. There hasn't been a real sequel to it. There hasn't been any games that continue the story yet. We're kind of waiting for that, but it hasn't happened at all. No other game has come out since then under the name of Jack and Daxter. No real Jack and Daxter game. In an alternate universe where Jack has a different voice, Kira wears jackets and Daxter isn't funny, Jack, Kira and Daxter are all heading off to the brink, the edge of the world, to find a new eco-source because there's a new eco-source shortage, which you'd really think would happen every other Tuesday. And they go to the brink of the world to find floating pirate ships and floating spaceships. Do I have to do this? It turns out the really big ship belongs to this race of people called the Europans, and they're led by Duke Skyheed of Europa, and yeah, they help Jack and Daxter out because Jack and Daxter helped them out against some pirates. So they have a thing called the Eco-Seeker, and they want to use the Eco-Seeker in order to find a big source of eco power in the brink, which is of course what Jack and Daxter and Kira are looking for, so they all agree to work together, which is nice. But then the Eco-Seeker and Kira are just taken by the pirates. Captain Phoenix is the leader of the pirates, and he takes it all. Jack and Daxter end up crashing on an island where they meet a castaway. His name is Tim, get over it. Tim helps them fix the helicarrier. He's this really old hermit guy who has no memory of anything, conveniently. They manage to catch up with Phoenix and everyone, and there's this really cliched love triangle between Jack, Phoenix and Kira. Don't bother looking into it because nothing comes of it. They end up losing the Eco-Seeker and have to get it back for no reason, and then they need more light eco, so they go to a place to get it, and it turns out the Europans, the race of people with grey skin that Jack and Daxter were hanging out with earlier, they've been experimenting with dark eco, and when Jack finds that out, he's not pleased, because, you know, he knows what that's like and he doesn't like it. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention that there's a really shaky, weird truce that Jack and Phoenix are working out right now to get this all done. And in the midst of this, they all become great friends, predictably, and it turns out that Phoenix was the leader of a fleet for the Europans, but he found out what Duke Skyheed was up to, because Duke Skyheed turns out to be the villain to the surprise of nobody, because he was experimenting with Dark Eco, and Tim was a Dark Eco sage, but unlike Gaul, he didn't go mad for some reason, and they all kind of fell out, and since then they haven't been talking, and they all decide together, we're going to stop Duke Skyheed from doing his bad stuff, because Dark Eco is bad. But then Phoenix is betrayed by his right-hand man. Tragic. Oh, and Skyheed's right-hand man, he led Jack and Daxter to help them, but gets killed really quickly. What a shame. And Dark Daxter appears a couple more times, but he still does nothing. Alright, forget it. Phoenix dies, and Duke Skyheed dies, all the Europans die, and Daxter and Kira and Tim all live happily ever after next to the Eco Core. There! That's what happens.
The more you think about it, the more it hurts the head.
Okay, I've bleached my brain now, so I feel better, and that's me done. That's the entire Jack and Daxter series overall covered and completed until they make another game, which may or may not happen. Seems that Naughty Dog still have something in mind for them, but you know, for sure. Anyway, so a few people are probably going to notice this video is a lot longer than like what is Kingdom Hearts 1. Despite the fact that Kingdom Hearts is a much longer and far more complicated series with more games in it. I guess that's partly because I did kind of rush a lot of stuff in Kingdom Hearts, and I didn't want to do that for this video because people didn't really appreciate that the first one. It left a lot of questions hanging, so I decided to go into further.
Naughty Dog, they're a big deal these days, and no matter what you think about their recent output, you can see why they may hold a key place in the heart of many a gamer. If you're in your 20s, it's quite feasible you grew up alongside their output, which slowly developed a more adult tone all the way up to today. At least in terms of the games that they made that people know about, they hold both nostalgia credentials and modern critical darling credentials. They have a 90s childhood classic series in the backlog, and more recently, in the era of big technical show-off games, they moved into the territory of huge set-piece extravaganzas and adult drama, winning over a lot of people in the mainstream. But then, there's the awkward teen years.
Wanna try to beat me, Score?
Oh, don't worry. Jack beats things all the time. Hey, Jack?
The Jack and Daxter trilogy came out between Crash and Uncharted and was Naughty Dog's big PlayStation 2 franchise. It's also worth noting they were the last games that the company made with the original founders Andy Gavin and Jason Rubin involved. If you bring up the words Jack and Daxter today, you'll probably get people going, oh yeah, those were good. But if you go further than that and try going into more detail and try nailing down some specifics with people, they start getting more like, what happened in those games again? Who was he? There was a big guy in it, right? Was that in 2? or 3. Which one was the good one again? I might be exaggerating a bit, but it's fair to say that when it comes to enthusiasm and specifics, you get a lot more out of people if you bring up Crash or Uncharted, which is weird to me because the Jak trilogy were and are some of my favourite games. They're probably my favourite games Naughty Dog have made. I was super passionate about this series as a kid, and they got my brain going in regards to what was even possible when creating gaming worlds. So today I want to pick apart the trilogy, see what makes it tick, what works, what doesn't, see why it didn't click with some people, and maybe also look at why we haven't seen numbered Jak games escape the PS2 yet. Before we begin, I just want to give a little shout out to Crunchyroll, who sponsored this crazy long video. They're offering TGBS viewers 14 free days of ad-free anime streaming on Crunchyroll Premium via the link in the description. Stick around for more info at the end of the vid. Anyway, let's get to it.
Okay, I'm fine. I'm fine.
The biggest thing everyone can give to the Jak series is that they are insane technical achievements. The first game, a little quest where silent protag Jak has to help his buddy Daxter turn human again, took the Mario 64, Kanjo and Bazooie 3D platformula of hub worlds and a diverse series of freeform levels branching off from each
Leave
one,
it alone.
and made probably one of the biggest technical leaps in the history of Gideo games. Okay, I'm gonna stop that now. Everything interconnected, no loading times outside of a couple of seconds when dying, or jumping through a fast travel. You have to wait a little moment when traveling to some levels, but the camera makes an effort to not cut away from Jak. You can travel from the first room of the game to the final boss arena and never see a loading screen. You can climb to high points and see other levels out in the distance, making the world feel vast yet interconnected and tangible, targeting 60 frames and all. There's no progressive scan, but that's basically the only technical hiccup here. Minimum loading is the kind of consideration devs today don't care about that much, but Jak was making it look easy in 2001. The greatest year ever! But Jak and Daxter is no slouch in terms of core gameplay either. Jak has some of the smoothest, most versatile movement in a 3D platformer. Jak can transition into a high jump if you hold X at the right time after a roll jump or a ground pound, allowing him to quickly spring higher than usual every time he hits the ground. You can crouch and hit X to high jump, but you're always going to want to be keeping that flow going, trying to bounce off the ground whenever possible without stopping. I think a part of me rates a platformer that gives you a lot of tools to never stop moving. Having two melee attacks might seem like overkill at first, but the punch allows Jak to propel himself in a direction, while the spin allows him to deal damage without creating forward momentum. Both options come in handy. Being able to transition into a higher jump out of a punch super fast also adds to the synergy between platforming and attacking. Chaining jumping and offensive moves all together to keep Jak on the move is inherently satisfying. The terrific animation is the icing on the cake. All of Jak's animations transition between moves seamlessly. Your buddy Daxter clinging on in all sorts of different ways also adds to the detail. Jak's animations are just the biggest next-gen flex. I honestly don't think Jak and Daxter gets enough credit for how inherently satisfying Jak is to just play around with. The basic interactions in Jak are a step above plenty of other 3D platforms that may come together thanks to other elements that complement the core movement, like a surplus of extra unlockable abilities, level design, aesthetics, theming, etc., but don't have this level of cathartic synergy between moves that makes just jumping around in place in Jak a joy. Technically, and in terms of core movement design, the first Jak is amazing, but in everything else, it's a little anemic and basic, I think. The game is a collectathon where you try and get X amount of items to open the next set of levels.
You don't have enough power cells to fuel my heat shield. You can't cross Fire Canyon until you collect enough power cells.
It's got your usual standard stuff. Snow, swamp, beach, forest, cave, standout underwater city area, and some cool ancient temple settings, mixing things up. It's just there isn't too much to say about most of it. Now don't get me wrong, Jak 1 has an irresistible charm to anyone who just wants to jump into a game world and go exploring. Going deeper and deeper away from the hub worlds and getting caught in some kind of devious trap or finding some incredible vista far from home is rewarding for sure. But a lot of the game is kind of unmemorable because the context of what you're doing and the places you find just isn't terribly exciting a lot of the time. There are a few cool set pieces here and there, but when you get down to specifics, there's not all that many. There's 101 power cells in the game to get. 31 of those are just from collecting orbs and trading them in, or finding 7 special crates in each level. So non-specific tasks, just going about the place picking stuff up.
Would you be kind enough to load your dear old uncle 90 precursor orbs?
And that's not even taking into account the power cells that are just found lying around by themselves. What makes things feel especially weak, though, is that when there is a specific objective associated with getting a power cell, it might just boil down to herding animals, beating a time trial, getting caught in a horde of enemies, shooting rats in a swamp. Now, I'm not saying that exploring this world and collecting things isn't fun. I'm just trying to figure out why I find it a little harder to remember specifics about this game, even though I've played through it like 10 times. In the moment, it feels great to jump around as Jack and collect things, but the game becomes more unmemorable and a little harder to connect with in the long term, because the context of what you were doing wasn't really that exciting or interesting. There are only 3 bosses in the game, so more to discover might have helped the title feel more meaty. Here's the thing, there are some cool memorable moments that I do want to draw attention to that stick out to me. One of them involving a boss. Climbing the big tower in the Forbidden Jungle lets you go deep underground and activate a giant well of blue eco, a power source that will flow all over the game world in other levels for you to now access. Down there, there's also a boss parasite kind of creature that, if defeated, will take care of these bothersome tentacles around the level. It's these kinds of actions, exploring a level and finding a secret that affects the entire game world at large, that stand out. It feels great to explore and uncover something that alters the world as a whole, capitalizing on the open, non-linear structure of the game. Another memorable moment again like this is if you find the hidden yellow eco switch in the snowy mountains behind some trees that lead to a cool platforming challenge. You can open up a secret event in an older level which lets you net one of the more secret power cells. These are cool, rewarding moments the game could have done with more of. Having progression tied to random disconnected activities, some of which can just involve finding X amount of currency, does allow for the game to be very non-linear, which is great. If you don't like one thing, you can go do another. But very little you do actually connects to the main thrust of the plot or anything.
That was Gull? The same Gull who's supposed to change me back? Gull is the guy trying to kill us? I'm doomed.
You get power cells, which you need to access more levels, but most activities are disconnected from the central conflict of saving Daxter, fighting Golan Maya, saving the sages, etc. You gave this guy his pet back. You gave these 2 some cash. You flew through some hoops. You got to the top of a tall thing. Like, none of that has anything to do with the main thrust of the plot, which is par for the course for a collectathon, I guess. But when you combine that with the pretty subdued, restrained activities you have to take part in, you get a game that feels a bit lacking in bite. You know, if a game is just about a bunch of disconnected activities that let you collect a bunch of things that let you fight a final boss, at least make the things you're doing, like, you know, pretty crazy and memorable, you know? Though I will say that when you do finally save the sages at the end of the game, that the platforming challenges there are a real nice, cool challenge, and I enjoy this bit every time. I think an issue with Jak 1 is that conceptually, the world and characters and style lack a very strong voice or vision. A mad scientist captures a bunch of Australian critters to experiment on, but one escapes and fights back. An alien and a robot travel the galaxy to fight evil with sci-fi weapons. A raccoon who's a thief. I get it. Jak and Daxter is harder to get a grip on. Jak is a human guy, well, kinda, he's got like big ears, and he lives in a fantasy world with advanced tech, but it's also kind of old-timey with magic and ancient relics and gods. And his friend gets turned into a made-up creature that's a combination of otter and weasel by an evil magic power source thing. It's a bit of everything and a little hard to grasp immediately for the casual consumer, so I can see why Jak and Daxter at the time scored really well in 2001, but doesn't get brought up that much in the discourse today. I love its core gameplay and technical proficiency, which far surpasses other platformers of the time, but I don't find myself feeling that passionate about the experience as a whole without that extra bit of thematic, contextual, and even emotional spark Save Ratchet 1 had, for example. In 2007, Jason Rubin, the director, addressed some of the misgivings he had about Jak 1 and how he saw it as something that didn't really connect with any specific audience to the degree Crash did.
Here's my personal opinion on Jak and Daxter, is that we, and by we I mainly mean I, made a mistake in directing that title to be too broad for too many audiences. Crash was designed as we thought Crash should be, and then tweaked for other territories.
Gotcha.
Jak was a mishmash of a lot of ideas from a lot of people as we were creating the character. And at the end of the day, I don't think he looked like a great Western character. I don't think he was a great Japanese character. There were things we did for the European market that I don't think were great. There were things we did actually for Saudi Arabia and other markets like that might have hurt it. I think that character was a little too much of the kitchen sink.
Right.
Whereas I think Crash was a little more pure, a vision, and I wouldn't make that mistake again.
And I get it, you know, Jak, he's kind of in between aesthetics. He's not quite anime, but he's not quite American comic book either. He's caught between looks, and I could see why he might have not entirely connected with people at the same level as a Crash, who was very specifically a wacky, zany, anthropomorphic character who could be tweaked ever so slightly for different markets and work really well pretty much everywhere. Jak, literally and figuratively, didn't feel like he had much of a voice. So maybe, you can see why the sequel changed things up to the degree it did.
I'm gonna kill Praxis. Right now, we gotta get you out of here. Just let me figure out how to open the security box for the chainsaw. You can do it.
Jak 2 mixes things up significantly.
May I help?
You look like a reasonably smart man. I want information. Where the hell am I?
Sorry. He's new to the whole conversation thing.
So does the turn towards a gritty, open-world, sci-fi city and more mature subject matter really help the Jak series garner a more defined, discernible identity?
Surrender and die.
Excuse me, sir. Don't you mean surrender or die?
Not in this city.
Well, at first glance, you'd think it wouldn't. You know, I think Jak 2 still pulls from too many different directions: sci-fi, magic, extreme sports. Now it's also aping the gritty GTA craze with crime and rebellion, while remaining at a sort of PG-13 level of gratuity and violence, and also just chuck time travel on there too while you're at it. It's all a bit too much and all over the place tonally and conceptually still, I think, to tap into any kind of cultural vein like Crash and become a super mainstream smash. Crash was one broad idea really drilled into rather than a bunch of broad ideas thrown together, pulling at each other from different directions. I'm not saying something pulling from multiple directions can't make a serious mark on pop culture, of course, but I think it's considerably harder, and you're fighting an uphill battle when your characters are also funny elf people and not human beings that are easier to relate to. And you have other issues I'll get to a little later that the Jak series suffers from in regards to character development and theming. First, though, the elephant in the room.
The design we did on Jak 1 kind of fell in this weird mishmash that kind of seemed odd to people in America, it seemed odd to people in Japan. It didn't really satisfy anybody. And we looked at the market at that time. There's no question that Grand Theft Auto, which was completely unpredictable as a phenomenon when we started Jak, had become a massive phenomenon. And we just said to ourselves, okay, if we could redesign Jak and Daxter for what we want and completely ignore what anybody else might like, what would it look like? And Jak became a little bit harder core.
The open world GTA stuff is a glaringly weird way to go. The risks in this approach are obvious. The inevitable alienated fans of the first game, and the uncertainty of grabbing new ones. One might assume it'd be a total disaster, but as far as the game itself goes, well, I'm gonna say what I think Jason Rubin has been waiting to hear for years.
Did you like it or not like it, actually, if the caller's still on the line?
He's not.
Oh.
I really, really liked it. You'd think everything I said about them taking Jak and harshening the tone of the world would just add to the crisis of identity the first game suffered from. Just piling more stuff on top, and yeah, it would seem that way at first, but it does become something unique in its own right. It's added so much that it comes full circle back around to being something wholly original. Maybe not for the mainstream, but at least for yours truly. I think Jak 1 doesn't get enough credit for its technical achievements and core gameplay, but let's face it, There are a lot of games like Jak 1, there aren't many games like Jak 2. There aren't that many 3D platformer, GTA-styled, open-world city, post-apocalyptic games about overthrowing a government. You get the tight jumping mechanics of Jak 1 mingling with gunplay, which brings the depth of the combat up to speed with the depth of the platform. Add vehicle jacking on the fly, a hoverboard you can get out at any time, a series of interesting plot-relevant scenarios to get put in, a grim but atmospheric world, and you really have a platformer here like no other. There are a few games that go this all out on so much different stuff conceptually, and I kinda love it. In a way, back in the day, Jak 2 became the perfect stepping stone for a younger gamer like me, from the more light-hearted stuff to the more mature adult games I'd be
Not here.
thrown into this dangerous world with unpleasant people, navigating tougher challenges and characters dealing with loss, overcoming more than just goofy villains. It was really exciting and thrilling for me. Jak 2 is ambitious in how it tries to create this huge plot and new lore with a big cast of characters, and I think it does struggle a little.
Don't forget to
Everything's cool. Nobody panic.
A lot of this comes from how punchy and quick the cutscenes are. They're snappy and the direction is a cut above most other games, but everything is rattled off so quick, it's hard to always know what everything means or who everyone is. But the basics become apparent pretty quick, and the setup of this game is honestly one of my favorite things about it. Jak and Daxter are transported to a mysterious, futuristic city. It's the future. Might as well just get that out of the way. Jak is captured and used as an experiment that gives him dangerous powers, but eventually he escapes into the city, where on the one hand there's the tyrannical Praxis and the Crimson Guard, who rule with an iron fist, and on the outside of the city walls, the incoming menace of the savage metalhead creatures. Jak is in opposition to both parties, who themselves are in opposition to each other too.
Your precious city. Pay the price.
He's toying with us. Let me lead an assault on the nest before it's too late. I can take him.
Patience, Commander.
You then have more neutral parties, like Crew, one of the best characters in the series.
The underground will take anyone with a pulse these days. What we have here, the Shadow's mascot of the month.
A crime lord working for his own gain at everyone's expense. Then you have the underground working to overthrow Praxis, and they mingle with other parties who work for the establishment, who don't necessarily like Praxis, but also see the importance in getting rid of the metalheads. And as Jak, you're basically this loose cannon thrown into the story and its world out of nowhere, and you have to navigate all these different players. And it's daunting, but empowering to get to cause chaos and undermine the status quo. Contextually, this also makes every mission feel like it's having you work towards a goal, impacting either Praxis or the metalheads, or serving as a way to curry favor with someone for information, or the bare minimum get some kind of upgrade that feels like a more personal reward than a shiny ball 1 out of 100. Even when the context does get a little shaky, do I prefer the missions here to herding cows? Yeah, I do. The way Jak 2 plays with the updated setting and changes to the characters from Game 1 is actually quite clever and consistent with the universe as a whole. It doesn't totally disregard Jak 1. Jak 1's world feeds into this one nicely. In fact, I made a list of ways that it does. Jak's voice. Unlike some games that might try and not acknowledge that their protagonist used to be silent, Jak 2 makes that a very canon aspect of Jak's character in the first game.
Say something! Just this once!
And that's not where it ends.
Maybe this guy's a noob, like you used to be.
Jak and Daxter are separated from Kira, their mechanic friend from the first game, and when they meet, she's behind a curtain and doesn't see them.
I'm working on a secret vehicle project.
Okay, sorry.
In their first scenes in Jak 2, she Daxter speaks,
Do not bite.
Voice.
that she realizes she's talking to Jak and Daxter.
Let's go, Jack.
Daxter, it is you!
Kira!
I mean, why would she recognize Jak's voice? She's never heard him speak.
And Jack, you look different.
I mean, I guess they don't
You
recognize
adjusting?
her voice. Okay, quick, let's just move on. Lurkers. The main enemy types in Jak 1 were the Lurkers, who work under the orders of the big bad, Skull and Maya. But in the future, they've become a slave class that Jak and Daxter work to help liberate in certain missions. An enemy type from the previous game are allies this time. This was a year before Half-Life 2 did that.
Lurker in a tree, stuck in a sewer grate, foaming at the mouth. Call the friendly officers of the KAC.
good way to show how the threats in this game are considerably more dangerous than the last title, and the foes from the last game have been brutally domesticated. Jeez. Precursor orbs. It's the future, so they're super rare now.
These precursor orbs are worth a lot now.
Gets rid of the collectathon element with a plausible explanation. Guns. The ammo for each of your 4 guns reflects the eco power types from the first game. Red eco from the first, that made you punch stronger, now translates to the blunt raw force of the shotgun's ammo. Yellow eco was your projectile ability in 1, so now it's the ammo for your long-range weapon. Blue eco used to make Jack fast, so that's used for ammo in his rapid-fire gun. And dark eco is, scary and dangerous and destructive, so it powers the low-capacity BFG-style mega gun. Now this is a big video that covers 3 games, so since I already broke out a list, I'm gonna do it again to rattle off other things I like about Jack 2, and things I don't like as much about it. Also, just to get this out of the way, Jack 2 features progressive scan now, so instead of having to deal with interlacing like with Jack 1, this shit's gonna look crisp. I'm sticking to 4x3 though, since the 16x9 mode is just some fake cropped bollocks, and I ain't playing no HD collection with glitched up cutscenes or PS4 emulation with wonky audio. Anyway, a rant for another day. Polish. This game is so polished it's bursting at the seams. Graphically, first off, it's just... the detail is stunning, and still in a world that forgoes loading screens. I already mentioned the added moves, and the fact the new additions all flow into each other so seamlessly is awesome. Quality animation as usual. The new quick shot you can do after a punch feels great and impactful, and in terms of pure gameplay serves as a great way for Jack to flow from melee into a ranged attack nice and fast. Just like how a long jump can be quickly transitioned into a high jump with good timing, punching and firing can also coexist in quick succession. On top of how well the basic combat and platforming animations flow into each other, there's just tons of extra added detail on top of that animation. Jack holding his gun sideways from time to time, looking all gangster, or carrying himself differently depending on the gun he's holding. Daxter reacting to the gun's firing or trying to look tough when Jack sees new auto. I also love how on vehicles Daxter holds the gun while Jack drives, which is a nice detail but also helps make the duo look more like a team within gameplay, sharing duties. What's also very detailed is the soundtrack. Jack 2 isn't cranking out any club bands,
Lay down.
but uses a really cool dynamic music
Lay down.
system.
Lay down. If you're gonna be up here, you gotta lay down.
Stand in a level unarmed and the track is subdued. Get a gun out and it ramps up a bit to get you pumped.
It's almost dinner time. So close.
Sometimes if enemies start coming at you, the track will start including stings to emphasize the danger. It adds weight to certain encounters, lending them gravity and intensity when needed. Rather than the game acting indifferent to them showing up. If you get on your jetboard, the level music also alters to match. Oh yeah, I just mentioned the jetboard, that's also cool. The jetboard, so if the GTA trend wasn't enough, the skateboarding trend was also in full effect in the early 2000s, so your cool character needed to do some gnarly extreme sports. If everything Jack 2 added wasn't enough, you get a hoverboard and its own dedicated skate park, but you can also get it out whenever, which beats the boards in most other games that had skating in them. I wish the transition of getting out the jetboard was just a little smoother and quicker. I could imagine it being really cool to just jump in and off of it and do mad tricks as I'm shooting enemies, but still a cool feature either way, right? Difficulty. I think this is actually a point of contention for most people with Jack 2. It's even the one criticism on the Wikipedia summary. Damn. But I err on the side of enjoying the challenge here. Yeah, I know, I'm pretty cool, aren't I? Again, the ramp up made sense for me as a kid, going from a game that looks like this to this, You'd expect a bit of a beef-up-in challenge to match, right? It makes sense to make a harder game for a harder tone, yeah? The lack of checkpoints in a lot of missions make a lot of situations more tense than they would be otherwise. Being ambushed right at the end of a mission feels like life or death, because there's actually some consequence to losing. That said, I think it can rub people the wrong way how arbitrary the checkpoints appear at first glance. Some missions have multiple and some don't have any, and there's no indication when a checkpoint has been triggered. I can see how that uncertainty might create a sense of frustration in people rather than a sense of excitement, so maybe flagging when checkpoints are triggered could have alleviated the guessing work here a little. That said though, the fact that a mission with an ambush at the end lacks checkpoints while other more open-ended missions with a more laid-back feel have them for convenience makes me think that adding intensity to specific missions by having fewer checkpoints to match the mood, tone and adrenaline that's trying to be evoked is a deliberate choice rather than an oversight, and I think that deliberate tailoring does work in most cases. What's a drag is waiting for an AI partner if you die. That I can get is aggravating. Daxter.
Yeah, a massive pool of gooey chocolate. Then the girls and I would jump in together. What?
I think his cheeky antics work better with a slightly more mature tone. What can I say?
Whoa, she's a Betty. And she likes you, Jack. Not that I can account for her tastes. I bet you'd love to pin some medals on her chest, huh? What? What'd I say? What did you say, Jack?
Haven Forest. This level is just great. It's not just an in-universe testament to the fact that the more spiritual elements of this world can preserve some of its beauty despite the decay elsewhere. The gameplay here is some of the most fun. Hunting metalheads on the jetboard or playing cat and mouse with some predator camo dudes. Sick, awesome. The palace platforming segment. Yeah, we're talking naughty gods now with this flex. You take a Secret Service elevator up to one of the palace's beams and get to see the entire game world for the first time out in front of you. The whole city and all the different levels out in the distance looks amazing. Had me goddamn floored. It's also just a sick platforming level in its own right. That added sense of vertigo just enhances every jump. Damn. Even over 15 years later, coming up here out of the dark, dingy slums for the first time, up to this vista, is such a neat and refreshing moment. The Peacemaker. The Mega Ultra Ultimate Gun is demoed to you by another character early in the game.
We're rolling with the Peacemaker.
Whoa! I need one of those!
So getting your own later is more of a payoff and underlines the progress Jack has made in this city from backup dancer, protecting someone who's using it, to main eventer, guy who's using it himself.
Now we're rocking.
The second Praxis fight. The Praxis fights channel the engine fights from Crash pretty hard, but the context for the second Praxis fight pushes things just a little bit further. Praxis spends the fight trying to crack the powerful precursor stone out of its pedestal. He actually pulls it off near the end of the fight and immediately starts using it as a weapon against you. A boss quickly makeshifting a weapon halfway through the fight makes it seem like he's thinking on his feet about stuff to do against you on the fly, even if it's actually, of course, just his next scripted move. We also get to see the power of the precursor stone firsthand in gameplay as it's used against us, rather than being told how dangerous it is during exposition. Nice. Breaking back in to get your buddies. The first mission in the entire game sees Jack escaping prison, running from his captors. Act 3 of the game, the beginning of the final third, sees Jack break back into prison to get his friends out who have been captured. Mowing through these guards with Jack's newly accrued skills feels ace. You've turned the tables now, they shouldn't have messed with you. It's a striking difference from the start of the game. You're no longer running away, but taking the fight to them. Now that's not everything I like about Jack 2, but I think we gotta move on to the stuff that I don't like so much about it, to be fair. So let's do that. Dark Jack. You know, I'm a pretty cool guy. In concept, I like the idea of Dark Jack. You know, going rage mode, turning into a beast, channeling powerful forces to become a demon. I like that kind of stuff. But here its implementation leaves something to be desired, I think.
Something's happening to me. Something he did. I can't control it.
So considering Dark Jack, Jack's new power to go all rage mode, a result of the prison experiments, was such a big part of this game's advertising, the devs talking about Jack having like an internal conflict.
What makes Jack special in this game is he has an internal conflict, which is directly related to the external conflict of the story. and the two combine, so the plot is very organic because it grows out of that.
It's notable how little it actually plays into either the story or gameplay. I mean, plot-wise, there's some stuff about how Jack is too corrupted by his dark side for some prophecy, but whatever. Sometimes characters reference Jack can get mad and go Dark Jack sometimes, but we rarely see the transformation that much in cutscenes, other than just before the final boss. I mean, that is a pretty cool moment to do it, don't get me wrong, but then I'm going like that. The issue is we don't really see Jack wrestle with the dark side that much in the story. It doesn't feel like he needs to learn to control it like some Hulk alter ego. People just kind of make fun of him for it or don't even acknowledge it at all. In terms of gameplay, you need to collect a bunch of dark eco to use it, and I think it just takes a little too long to get enough to transform. Then the transformation doesn't actually last that long, and Jack flies around so much when using it, you might think twice about when and where to break it out anyway, even if it's available. As a result, you probably won't even see it that much throughout the game, especially when doing a string of story missions that may be more platforming or vehicle focused. Also, Crimson Guard don't drop Dark Eco, which makes sense, I guess, from a lore perspective. They drop ammo instead because they carry guns. It's metalheads, the creatures from the wastes, that drop Dark Eco. But from a thematic perspective, you'd think the catalyst for Jack going rage mode should be the group that imprisoned him. Oh well, the game also wants to give you Dark Jack powers to unlock, but the ideas run out pretty quickly. You get a room clearing move, another room clearing move, and invincibility, and Big Dark Jack, the last two of which you probably won't unlock till the end of the game anyway. Maybe next time, Dark Jack. Civilians. Speaking of dark stuff, I feel like the one place where the maturity of Jack 2 does go a bit far is Jack's ability to go out into the street and murder a bunch of people. Which is kind of awkward from a story gameplay perspective, because you can basically, through gameplay, make the totalitarian regime look like the good guys. Like, I get it, as far as the game's cutscenes are concerned, Jack going on a killing spree is just as canon as, say, the player deciding to have Jack walk into a wall for 10 minutes before triggering the next cinema. But it's just a little weird, isn't it? Of course, even if you, don't choose to psychotically wander the streets shooting up the place, the amount of innocence that can get caught in the crossfire in just a given mission is shocking either way. It's so out of character with all this talk of heroism to make Jack be able to cause such levels of collateral damage. Innocents being caught in the crossfire so often during gameplay. It's just weird to be able to do this and then rock up all altruistic to a cutscene. And you thought Uncharted had pseudo-wudo narrative dissonance. Honestly, I think maybe going the way the Japanese localization did, letting you hit civilians, but making them unkillable, would have been better. I know they wanted to show how GTA they could be by letting the player cause citywide chaos, but it's not like this is some emergent sandbox that might benefit from that level of freedom when seeing what kind of mayhem might ensue. You hit people and they die, that's sort of the extent of it. The open world city in Jack 2 is a cool atmospheric hub level select. It's not an extensive life sim. That said, they probably would have been called pussies if they hadn't let you kill them in the edgy 2000s, so I get why it's the way it is. The racing cop-out. Okay, so this is a weird one. One of Jack's main motivations is getting into Praxis's palace to get revenge. And the prize for becoming the racing champion is a ticket to the palace. So this becomes one of the ongoing quests of the game. Become the champion and get the ticket. Now, putting to one side the fact that Jack breaks into the palace at one point before winning anyway, once you do win, you beat all 3 races and get into the palace. You talk to Ashlyn, who you could really have had a conversation with anywhere, and then the level is spent, I guess, escaping the palace, and that's it. After all that work, nothing was really accomplished getting into the palace. It's a cool level gameplay-wise, but why did we do all that? Save the lurkers. Again. Okay, so Jack 2 is actually pretty good at not repeating missions despite its considerable length, with the exception of the rescue the lurkers missions. In the first one, you have to rescue 3, and then later there's another one where you have to rescue 6. Not much to say, just that was kind of lazy feeling. I mean, it only sticks out because most of the missions are pretty diverse, but sticks out nonetheless. Character arcs and theming. But okay, that stuff's all nitpicking, really. I think the big issue Jack 2 and the series as a whole really has, and why I think a lot of people don't really connect with it on the level they might do with other series of the time, and why they might find it hard to really remember the stuff that happened in them a lot of the time, is that even with the change in tone, the Jack games fail to be about all that much in terms of character or theming. Ratchet & Clank has its core theming revolve around consumerism and advertising, blah blah blah, yeah I know, I've gone on about that enough. And the first game had a great arc for its main character, where the duo learned to like each other and team up by the end to win the day. In the sequels you have characters like Quark who develop and change, and let's just say that comparing Jack to the Sly games and their characters and themes, well, that ain't gonna end well for Jack Baxter. Characters in that trilogy are constantly talking to each other about how they feel and the situations they're in, developing and changing so much from
stressing me out.
Thematically, the way the series ends with an indictment of the concept of legacy and the expectations that come with it, how clinging to it and the past rather than finding a sense of self is foolish, an in-depth look at different forms of pride and jealousy with a message about how we don't have to conform to what is expected
Stay away.
based on the role we're handed at birth. All the roles we end up adopting later. Yeah.
Alright, you're done.
Guess we should talk about that another day, huh? What I'm saying is the game has a little more going on.
It's okay.
Cool.
You're okay. I just want you to be safe.
Jack does. And that
Not
feels
eat
like
something
a missed
you shouldn't.
opportunity, right? Aging up doesn't really leave us with satisfying arcs or messages to take away, aside from, basic stuff. Totalitarianism is bad. Monsters are bad. If you can, you should probably save the day, right? It's more interested in building lore and backstories and cool stuff to bounce, just the gameplay off of. And it does that great. Jack 2 is one of my favorite games ever. I just don't think it quite cuts to the bone of the potential I think this world and these characters have. Jack may say things that hint at development or an arc, but it rings hollow because we never really see how he reaches that point.
This place is worth fighting for.
They just say the odd line here and there that's like, oh yeah, implied depth. You'd think with the whole rage within aspect and being on a quest for revenge that Jack would have to learn to maybe tone things down and hold back his anger and base desires before things go too far. Maybe his light-hearted sidekick could be the one to get him on the right path. Build up the complexity of the main character's relationship, I don't know. But no, as I said, Jack's rage doesn't really come up all that much, and the target of his revenge just gets killed by someone else. Ultimately, no inner conflicts to be resolved that we see. Baron Praxis actually is a pretty cool villain on the face of things, trying to beat the metalheads at any cost. I think he could have been taken a lot further, though. The notion that he actually did succeed at beating the metalheads posthumously by making Jack the ultimate weapon is only touched on for a second before...
You are the supreme weapon, Jack. And I made you stew.
I guess we're moving on. I feel like there's interesting story juices to squeeze out all around here, but it's like I'm only getting seeds from my narrative fruit press here all the time. Jack and Daxter's dynamic as a duo never evolves or changes. They never really discuss the situations they're in or how they feel about them outside of jokes. They don't change that much over the trilogy. Obviously, there's a massive shift in demeanor from Jack 1 Jack to Jack 2 Jack, but we don't get to see that change happen, do we? We're just told that, oh, he's different now, he was in jail. And look, that's not to say the characters aren't good or fun. Jack and Daxter are great. They play off each other great.
See you soon, Jack. Be careful.
Yeah, Jack, be careful.
Seeing all these other characters scheme and bounce off our heroes is fun as well.
Listen, tons of fun. Anyone can see that you and I have the real juice in this bird. We're both players, right? We're both looking for a piece of the action, right? I think we can do business, right?
We did you a favor.
There's just not that much lingering meat to it all beyond the surface, I think. I feel like we're right there. We're just so close to reaching that added depth, and the game just doesn't quite dig that extra few centimeters. At least as far as I can tell.
Watch
Please
your
tell me if you
pausies.
garnered something deeper, because, I want to find it. And look, I'm not saying all this, I'm not saying there's a lack of depth because I'm trying to own the game. I'm just trying to
It's
pinpoint
not
the
dinner time
reason
yet.
why I think people aren't as attached to these titles, despite loads of people having played them. Despite the games having very polished gameplay and being made by one of the most well-known devs out there, other PS2 titles seem to hold a stronger place in the zeitgeist today. I don't think it was a priority to get that deep with things on the level I'm suggesting. I think there was a priority to make an amazing looking world and super impressively directed cutscenes. I just think there's a bit of a disconnect by how mature looking this game wants to be with how deep it actually gets. Sly and his friends get to talk endlessly, but they all look like barely animated puppets when chatting. Jak 2 is flexing much harder with its tight, snappy direction and animation, and maybe there wasn't time to make super long scenes with loads of added development and uphold this presentation quality. Or maybe Naughty Dog had it in their heads that gamers don't want to watch a bunch of long character development cutscenes, which is ironic considering the kind of games they make today. But anyway, none of that changes the fact that I was left wanting a little, but also, nothing changes the fact that Jak 2 is still one of my favourite games for the many reasons I've mentioned. Jak 2 was still a phenomenal game on so many levels, and there was still another game being made to wrap up the trilogy, so what the heck. Maybe with the third game there would be an opportunity to tie everything up in one big circle and really squeeze out all the remaining juices of what could be achieved with this series. Here we go!
Jak and Daxter 2 has been such an inspirational project for me to work on. I honestly don't know what to do next. Instead, I think I'm going to take a vacation.
Jason, no, don't go on vacation. Jason, no.
This was all your stupid idea. No, it was yours. Only a bird brain could have thought this one up. Let's go with him. We'll help together. You mean we'll die together?
You know, despite it all, I do really like Jak 3. There's a lot of creative ideas, neat moments, even some cool characters. I like it more than, say, Ratchet 3, but it's a bit of a mess. Made in 1 year rather than Jak 2's 2-year cycle, Jak 3 feels rushed and thrown together in a way the previous two much more considered titles don't. For Naughty Dog, reusing content and iterating rather than innovating still lands you a very polished, well-made, fun, diverse, energetic game. But it is still disappointing to see the Jak trilogy not stick the landing as far as I'm concerned. So Jak gets exiled because in the second game, Crew betrays the city to the Metalheads, and since Jak works for Crew, he's kind of caught up in the fallout, despite saving the city and killing the Metalhead leader. Anyway, so he's chucked out by a council who are super powerful.
The council is too powerful. There was nothing I know. Count Ruger, I hereby dissolve the city council and strip you of your title, command, and all privileges. Now get out of my sight.
Or not. Who's in charge now, exactly, after we, overthrew the Baron? Oh, then there's this guy. Okay, this guy, who was never mentioned before, he's like part of the council, whatever that is.
The council's meeting tonight in emergency session. Rumblings about you, Jak. It doesn't look good. I hereby dissolve the city council.
So this obvious Jafar dude has been kept around between administrations, even though we overthrew the evil dictator, and apparently he has a lot of influence still.
The council is too powerful.
And we can't get rid of him.
Count Ruger, I hereby dissolve the city council and strip you of your title, command, and all privileges.
Oh, no, we can just fire him too? Why didn't we do that before kicking Jak out of the city? You see, I was going to ask what the point of overthrowing the tyrant was, if this evil dude is just going to step in and take over, but I really can't tell who is in charge. Is it Ashlyn? Is it the council?
I hereby dissolve the city council.
I guess it is Ashlyn. I guess once the war in Jak 3 started picking up, Ashlyn was just like, screw it, we don't need a government, everyone's fired. Anyway, Jak is rescued by Deimos, the leader of the Wastelanders, who live outside the city in the desert, in their own much nicer city. Jak 3 seems weirdly uncritical of the Wastelander society though, portraying it as a force for good, and a system whose higher-ups Jak and Daxter should aim to befriend and fight alongside. In stark contrast to the way Praxis's reign over Haven City was justifiably shown as cruel and worthy of overthrowing. Sure, Praxis was a tyrant who used fear to keep his subjects in line, enacting heinous experiments on prisoners to create soldiers and using a scorched earth approach to take on those who opposed him. And I guess Deimos and Spargus City are a little better than that. But to my knowledge, he never captured his foes with just random people and forced them to fight to the death in a gladiator arena for the entertainment of his subjects. Praxis captured Jak and imprisoned him for 2 years while experimenting on him, but Deimos captures him and forces him to fight to the death, and then basically turns him into unpaid labor for the first third of the game, which overall I wouldn't say is too much of an upgrade. What is kind of upgraded, though, is Jak's moveset, which I want to say is an objective improvement, but it's a little hard to. Dark Jack has been altered a bit now, so instead of requiring a full meter of Dark Eco to activate, you can turn it on with any amount of Dark Eco, and then each attack you do will just expend remaining Eco. This means you might actually use the sodding thing. Jack's weapon count jumps from 4 to 12. He also has Light Jack powers now that let him recover health and stop time. The problem is that the difficulty of the game hasn't really increased, and the strategies the enemies employ haven't really become harder to contend with to match Jack's new huge combat moveset. With all these new abilities and weapons, you stroll into rooms, hold a button down, and everything just gets eviscerated. If you get hit, just use Light Eco, and easy peasy, you're back to full health. I think the option to go Dark Jack whenever is an improvement, but the game needed to be made harder and trickier to compensate. Dark Jack felt a bit too restrictive in 2, but the combat was hard, so saving maybe a Dark Jack bomb room clearer for a part giving you trouble was some kind of strategy at least. I say you might actually use Dark Jack now, but there's a possibility you might actually not, and you just hold down the fire button instead. Even if you did up the difficulty to force Jack to maximize the use of all his new abilities, I don't think the game would even become some super diverse playground of combat opportunity when a lot of his weapons feel very samey. I mean, do I need a gun that launches a disc that spins around and shoots all angles? He can kind of do that himself. A lot of this new combat breadth doesn't feel that thought out. Does Jack really need 2 moves that slow things down and freeze everyone in the room? Jack 2 caps off its combat with a final onslaught in the last level, and plowing through the dangerous metalhead nest single-handedly, nailing those bastards by mastering a combat system that gave you basically just the absolute essentials relative to the amount of enemies coming at you, was one of the best rushes in that game. Never really felt that kind of adrenaline with the combat in 3 because, well, you hold the button and everyone dies. This game also makes the wise choice to let precursor orbs found actually play into gameplay by allowing you to unlock more weapon upgrades and vehicles. But again, this edition feels built for a much harder and longer game than Jack 3 ends up being. Again, going back to the theoretical universe where the combat in Jack 3 is a lot harder, you don't do that much of it anyway. I counted how many missions out of the 60 are actually just about running around as Jack and fighting things, and it only came to about 32, including the tutorial and boss fights. Factor in travel times between missions, and it's safe to say you'll only be spending about half of the game, if that, actually jumping and fighting, in between racing and minigames. There are also less missions that combine regular Jack gameplay with some other form of gameplay. In Jack 2, you had more missions that allowed you to access a vehicle and dismount it at any time, so you could strategize about when to get out and lay down the smackdown and when to get back in. This could lead to fun, tense moments when you've dismounted to do something, but then have to frantically find a new vehicle to return to your objective. It felt very freeform. You could think up a quick plan on the fly and execute it. And yeah, there are a few missions like that in Jack 3, but less of them. A lot of the time you get a vehicle or no vehicle without much middle ground. A little less strategery going down. Before I rant anymore though, I want to go into the stuff I liked in Jack 3, just like with 2. It's a bit of a shorter list, but I do like this game quite a bit, so here we go. Being a wastelander. The concept of Jack being thrown out into the desert and becoming some kind of badass scavenger venturing out into a dangerous climate to retrieve hidden artifacts and valuables is cool. And it does remain cool for the first third or so of the game. It's the game's new USP, and I do vibe with it. There's not too much out there to find, but going out there and then coming back to base in the nick of time before a sandstorm, exploring a hidden temple, a part of me wishes they had been able to expand this setting more and not had most of the second acts be bumming around in one quarter of Haven City. That said, sneaking back into Haven City. Sneaking back into the city is one of my favorite segments of the game. You explore some ancient temple, head underground, play some F-Zero, make your way through an abandoned mine, and kick your way back into Haven. It feels like the ultimate act of defiance, and making such a long pilgrimage in one go is a satisfying bit of gameplay.
Oh yeah! The boys are back in town!
Let's go topside and see what kind of trouble we can get into.
Exploring the destroyed city. Near the end of the game, you get to explore the area of Haven City crushed by the fallen palace that came down at the start. Other than being a cool payoff, it's neat to see an area from the previous game in decay, and having to navigate it anew for a solemn final stretch. It's got the best extras. You can unlock dev commentary for the cutscenes, which was really cool and informative. You can also get these funny little in-character interviews with the cast.
You know, I'm an artist and I need my time, and I'm
creating new things and outlets for this process, and sometimes the hindrance of people coming up to me and telling me what I'm supposed to do just really pisses me off.
Charming stuff. Deimos. I know I just got done critiquing the entire society he's in charge of, but as a character, he's pretty good. He's like the only character in the series with like a traceable arc beyond just starting to like Jack more over the course of the game. I mean, yeah, actually that's his arc too, but he has the best version of it. He meets Jack and he's skeptical of him at first, but starts to warm up to him and they form a kind of father-son bond.
Be ready. You are shaping up to be one of my finest warriors, and I'll need you for the trials ahead. I mustn't lose you, like I lost my son.
So when Jack reaches one of the last levels and for the first time goes, you know what, maybe some backup would be good this time. Initially the beacon looking like it doesn't work, but then having Deimos come in for the rescue, quipping and trading little callbacks with Jack, well, it works pretty well.
I thought you said a smart warrior never takes his opponent head on. That depends on how hard your skull is. I'd say you and I are both rather headstrong.
By that point, you truly grow to like Deimos, and it's cool to have him show up and finally work with Jack as a team, which makes it sad when he dies, regardless of the fact that it turns out that he actually is Jack's dad and never knew.
You are the son of the great warrior Deimos.
The Deimos character stuff is pretty good all around. The precursor twist. The entire series opens with this question.
Who were the precursors? What was their purpose? And why did they vanish? I have asked the plants, but they do not remember. The plants have asked the rocks, but the rocks do not recall.
And in Jack 3, as is befitting of the end of a trilogy, we get some deets. I have a feeling this might be a divisive one, but I really liked the twist that the ancient lost godly precursor race orchestrating events throughout the series actually looked like a bunch